This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been a trucker for 22 years now, seen just about everything you can imagine on America's highways: accidents, wildlife, weather that'll make your hair stand on end. But what happened to me 3 years ago on I-40? I still can't explain it, never told many people about it either, 'cause who'd believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. It was mid-July, one of those nights where the desert heat still radiates off the asphalt even at 2 in the morning. I was hauling steel from Oklahoma City to Albuquerque, behind schedule because of some loading issues back at the depot. My dispatcher was riding my ass about delivery times, so I'd been pushing hard, probably too hard. By 2:17 a.m., I remember checking my dash clock. My eyes were starting to play tricks on me. You know how it gets. The white lines on the road start to dance, and you catch yourself nodding off for microseconds. Dangerous stuff. I was scanning desperately for anywhere to pull over, maybe grab some coffee, splash some water on my face. Just needed 15 minutes to reset. That's when I saw it. This flickering neon sign on the right side of the highway. Red Hollow Truck Stop. Never heard of it before, but man, it looked like an oasis in that moment. I signaled and took the exit, feeling that wave of relief you get when you know you're about to stand up and stretch your legs after hours of driving. The place looked old, not vintage cool old, but neglected old. The kind of place that time and the interstate system forgot. As I pulled in, I noticed these ancient gas pumps, probably from the 70s, with cracked plastic casings. The parking lot was all cracked asphalt with weeds growing through, paint peeling off the building, but the open 24 hours sign was lit, and that's all I cared about. I parked my rig, a blue Peterbilt I'd been driving for about 4 years, and climbed down. The moment my boots hit the pavement, something felt wrong. It was totally silent. No highway noise, which was strange considering I-40 was just a quarter-mile back. No insects buzzing, nothing. Just this heavy silence pressing down. I chalked it up to exhaustion and headed for the entrance. The fluorescent lights inside were flickering, casting this sickly yellow glow. I pushed open the door and a little bell jingled overhead. The place was completely deserted. Now, truck stops at this hour usually have at least a couple drivers sitting around, or at minimum someone behind the counter. This place? Nothing. Just empty vinyl booths, a long counter with those spinning stools, and a kitchen area visible through a pass-through window. No staff, no customers. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. Just my voice echoing back. I figured maybe whoever was working had stepped out back for a smoke or bathroom break. There was an old coffee pot on a burner behind the counter, and I was desperate for caffeine. I went around and saw the coffee was burned to hell, thick and tar-like at the bottom of the glass pot. Probably been sitting there for hours. Still, caffeine is caffeine when you're dead on your feet. I found a mug, this faded thing with Route 66 printed on it, and poured what was left. It smelled awful, but I've had worse. That's when I heard it. An old-style payphone mounted on the wall near the restrooms started ringing. Not a cell phone, a genuine payphone with a rotary dial. Who even uses those anymore? I stared at it for a moment, wondering if I should answer. It kept ringing, 5, 6, 7 times. Finally, I set down my coffee and walked over. Maybe it was the night clerk calling in to check if anyone had stopped by. I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" There was static on the line, then a voice, raspy, like someone who'd smoked 3 packs a day for decades. "Don't leave," it said. "Not yet." The hair on my arm stood up. "Who is this?" I demanded. "They're coming. Wait for daylight." Then more static. "Who's coming?" "What are you talking about?" My heart was hammering now. "The trucks come back at night. They always come back." The line went dead. I hung up slowly, my hand shaking. I told myself it was just some prank, maybe kids from a nearby town messing with travelers. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I decided to get out of there. Coffee forgotten, I headed for the door. That's when I saw it. A figure standing by the kitchen, just a silhouette, really. Tall, unnaturally still. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark shape against the wall. "Hey," I called out, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. "You work here?" The figure didn't move or respond. Then slowly, it seemed to fade back into the shadows of the kitchen. Just disappeared. That was it. I'd been on the road too long, was seeing things. I headed straight for the door, but when I pushed, it wouldn't budge. I pushed harder. Nothing. Looked like it had been locked from the outside. I felt panic rising in my chest. I'm a big guy, 6'2" and solid, not someone who scares easy, but being trapped in this place, with whatever I'd just seen, I was terrified. I went to the windows thinking I could maybe force one open or break it if I had to. That's when all the lights in the place went out at once. Not flickering out, just snap, total darkness. In the pitch black, I heard an engine start outside, my engine. The distinctive rumble of my Peterbilt. I fumbled through the dark, banging my hip on a table until I reached a window. Outside in the parking lot, my truck's headlights flicked on, illuminating the lot, but there was nobody in the cab, nobody I could see anyway. The truck began to move, rolling forward slowly, then picking up speed as it headed toward the exit. My livelihood, my home away from home, driving away without me. Something in me snapped. I grabbed one of those spinning counter stools and hurled it through the glass door. The crash was deafening in the silence. I kicked away the remaining shards and climbed out, cutting my arm in the process, but I barely felt it. By the time I got outside, my truck was gone, tail lights disappearing down the road leading back to the highway. I ran after it for maybe 100 yards before reality set in. No way I was catching up on foot. I stood there in the middle of that empty road, breathing hard, blood trickling down my arm, watching my truck vanish into the night. I turned back to look at the red hollow truck stop, and I swear it looked even more decrepit than when I'd pulled in. Half the neon letters were out now. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years, not minutes. I had no choice but to start walking. No phone. It was in my truck. No other cars or trucks in sight. Just me, the desert, and whatever the hell was happening at Red Hollow. I walked for what felt like hours along the access road, eventually reaching I-40. The highway was deserted too, no traffic in either direction, which is unheard of even at that hour. I kept walking along the shoulder, hoping a car or state trooper would pass by. My watch said 5:45 a.m. when headlights finally appeared behind me. I waved my arms frantically, and to my relief, the vehicle slowed. A New Mexico State Police cruiser. The trooper who got out was young, maybe 30, with a suspicious look that softened when he saw the dried blood on my arm. "Sir, what happened to you?" he asked, hand resting casually near his holster. I told him everything. The truck stop, the phone call, the shadow, my truck driving away. As I spoke, I could see his expression change from concern to skepticism. "You say this happened at Red Hollow truck stop?" he asked when I finished. "Yes, just back that way," I pointed. "Maybe 4-5 miles. He shook his head. "Sir, there's no truck stop on this stretch of I-40. Hasn't been for at least 30 years. My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I was just there. Look." I showed him my arm. I cut myself, breaking out. "I believe you hurt yourself, sir, and I believe you think you were at a truck stop. But maybe you pulled over because you were tired, fell asleep, had a vivid dream, possibly sleepwalked. It happens to drivers all the time." I insisted we go back, see for ourselves. He reluctantly agreed, probably to humor me or because he was concerned about my mental state. We drove back the way I'd come. I kept my eyes peeled for the access road, the sign, anything. But when we reached the spot where I swore I'd turned off, there was nothing. No exit, no access road, just desert scrub and mountains in the distance. "This isn't right," I kept saying. It was right here. The trooper was patient but firm. "Sir, I've patrolled this highway for 7 years. There's never been a truck stop here during that time." He took me to the nearest hospital to get my arm looked at, and I filed a report about my stolen truck. Nobody believed my story. Not the doctors, not the other officers. They all thought I'd had some kind of episode from exhaustion. My truck was found 2 days later, parked at a rest area about 100 miles west of where I'd been picked up. Engine still running, fuel nearly gone, nothing missing, nothing damaged, just abandoned. I got back on the road eventually. Had to, it's my livelihood. But I avoid that stretch of I-40 like the plague now. Take detours, even if it costs me time and fuel. The strangest part? About 6 months after it happened, I was at a truck stop in Arizona, having coffee with some other drivers. One old-timer, must have been pushing 70, was talking about weird things he'd seen on the road. He mentioned a place called Red Hollow. Appears at night, he said, vanishes by morning, only shows itself to drivers who are running on empty, if you know what I mean. Been stories about that place since I started driving in the 60s. The others laughed it off as another trucker ghost story. But the old man caught my eye across the table, and I think he knew. He'd seen it too. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I find myself checking my mirrors more than I need to. Not for other vehicles, but because I swear I can feel something following me. Something that found me once at Red Hollow and isn't done with me yet. I still don't know what that place was, a ghost stop, a hallucination, some kind of trap. But it was real, and sometimes when I'm on a lonely stretch of highway and see an unfamiliar truck stop sign glowing in the distance, my foot instinctively moves to the brake before I catch myself. Because whatever's waiting at Red Hollow, I don't think it lets people go twice. Story: I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 17 years now, and I've seen my fair share of weird shit on the road. But what happened to me last October on Route 50 in West Virginia still keeps me up at night. I haven't told many people about it. Most would think I'm crazy, or that I fell asleep at the wheel. But I know what I saw. I know what happened in my truck that night. It was October 28th, and I was hauling a load of steel beams from Ohio to a construction site in eastern Pennsylvania. I was behind schedule because of some bullshit at the loading dock, so I decided to push through the night instead of stopping. Route 50 through West Virginia isn't my usual route, but there was construction on the interstate, and my GPS rerouted me. By 3 in the morning, I was deep in the mountains. No streetlights, no other cars, just pitch black all around except for what my headlights could catch. The radio kept cutting in and out, nothing but static, so I had turned it off. The silence was getting to me. Usually there's at least some traffic, even in the dead of night, but that stretch of road was completely deserted. The temperature gauge on my dash read 37 degrees. I remember because I was thinking about how fucking cold it was for October, even in the mountains. I had the heater blasting, a thermos of coffee in the cup holder, and was just focused on making it to the next truck stop in Clarksburg, where I could grab a hot breakfast. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, just a flash of white at the edge of my headlights. But as I got closer, I could make out a person standing on the shoulder with their thumb out, a woman in a white dress. I almost didn't stop. It was the middle of nowhere at 3 in the morning, and picking up hitchhikers is against company policy anyway. But something about seeing her there in that thin dress when it was so cold outside, I couldn't just drive past. What if her car had broken down? What if she was in trouble? So I slowed down and pulled over onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead of her. In my side mirror, I watched her walk toward my truck. Something was off about the way she moved. Not drunk or anything, just unnatural, like her feet weren't quite touching the ground right. I chalked it up to the weird angle in my mirror and the darkness. When she reached the passenger door, I leaned over and pushed it open. She climbed in without a word and sat down, closing the door behind her. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't body odor or perfume. It was like wet soil and decaying leaves, the smell you get when you dig into the ground after it rains. "Where you headed?" I asked, putting the truck back in gear. She didn't answer, just sat there with her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. In the glow from the dashboard, I could see her better. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair that looked tangled and damp. Her dress was simple, almost like a nightgown, and it was dirty around the hem. No jacket, no purse, nothing. "Look," I said. I need to know where to drop you off. There's not much out here for miles. Still nothing. I was starting to get nervous. My mind was racing with possibilities. Was she drugged? Running from someone? Mentally ill? I can take you as far as Clarksburg if you want. There's a truck stop there where you could call someone. The cab of the truck was warm, but I noticed she wasn't shivering even though she must have been freezing outside. She just sat perfectly still, like a statue. I kept glancing over at her while trying to keep my eyes on the dark road ahead. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes, she finally spoke. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Her voice was soft but clear, like she was right next to my ear even though she was on the other side of the cab. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I don't know. Never really thought about it," I answered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Some of them never stop wandering," she whispered. "They're looking for a way home, but they can't remember where home is anymore." I didn't know how to respond to that. The whole situation was getting weirder by the second. I glanced at her again, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The passenger window was slightly fogged up from the difference between the warm cab and the cold night outside. In that window, I could see her reflection, but it didn't match what was sitting next to me. While the woman beside me was sitting still, hands in her lap, the reflection in the window was standing up. It was twisted at an impossible angle, looming over me like it was about to reach through the glass. The face in the reflection was distorted, the eyes completely black. I jerked my head to look directly at her, and she was still sitting normally, but now she was looking right at me with this empty expression. When I looked back at the window, the reflection was still standing, still watching me. "Jesus Christ!" I shouted and slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded on the asphalt before coming to a stop in the middle of the empty road. I turned to confront her, demand what the hell was going on, but the seat was empty. I'm not talking about her slipping out while I was distracted. The door was still closed, locked from when I'd started driving again. There was no way she could have gotten out of a moving truck without me noticing. She had just vanished. I sat there, engine idling, staring at the empty seat. The smell of damp earth still hung in the air. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. I kept looking around the cab like she might be hiding somewhere, even though there was nowhere to hide. After a couple minutes of freaking out, I put the truck in gear and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop until I reached the truck stop outside Clarksburg, driving well over the speed limit the whole way. By then, it was almost 4:30 in the morning, and the sky was still dark. I parked and went inside, desperately needing coffee and human contact. The place was mostly empty except for a few other truckers and a waitress behind the counter. I must have looked like shit because when I sat down at the counter, the waitress, her name tag said Donna, immediately asked if I was okay. I wasn't planning to say anything about what happened. Who would believe me? But something about Donna's concerned expression broke through my resolve. Maybe I just needed to tell someone to convince myself I wasn't going crazy. "I picked up a hitchhiker back on Route 50, I said, keeping my voice low. "A young woman in a white dress. But then she disappeared from my truck while I was driving." I expected Donna to laugh or think I was drunk. Instead, the color drained from her face. She set down the coffee pot she was holding and leaned in close. "Where exactly did you pick her up?" she asked. I described the location as best I could, about 20 miles west of Clarksburg, near a sharp bend in the road where there was a guardrail and a steep drop-off beyond it. Donna nodded slowly. "You're not the first," she said. "That woman in the white dress has been seen on that stretch of road for years. Story goes that back in the 80s, her car went off the road at that curve during a storm. They found her body at the bottom of the ravine 3 days later." My mouth went dry. "And people see her hitchhiking?" "Always at night, always alone," Donna confirmed. "Most people who've seen her say she asks them strange questions during the ride, then disappears. Some think she's still trying to get home." I sat there in stunned silence. Donna poured me a cup of coffee on the house and told me to take it easy. I ended up staying at that truck stop until sunrise, unable to get back on the road until daylight broke. That was 4 months ago. I've taken every possible detour to avoid Route 50 since then. I switched to day routes whenever possible. I even considered quitting trucking altogether, but this job is all I know. The thing that haunts me the most isn't just that she vanished. It's that reflection in the window, the way it didn't match her actual position, the way it seemed to be looking down at me with those black eyes. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and the cab gets quiet, I catch myself checking the passenger window, afraid I'll see that reflection again. I don't know if what I experienced was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely. All I know is that there was someone, or something, in my truck that night that shouldn't have been there, and now I can't stop thinking about what she meant about ghosts who can't find their way home. Last week, I was driving through Pennsylvania when I passed a woman on the side of the road with her thumb out. It was broad daylight, but my heart nearly stopped. I didn't slow down. In my mirror, I saw her face as I passed, and she was normal, just a regular hitchhiker, probably annoyed that I didn't stop. But for a split second, I could have sworn she was wearing a white dress. I still drive the same routes, haul the same loads, but something fundamental has changed. That certainty I used to have about what's real and what isn't, it's gone now. And sometimes on long, quiet stretches of highway, I catch myself glancing at the shoulder, half expecting to see her standing there, thumb out, waiting. And when I do, I keep driving. Story 3. I still can't sleep properly even after 2 weeks. Every time I close my eyes, I hear those whispers. I've tried telling a few people what happened, but they all think I'm making it up or that I had some kind of mental breakdown. Maybe writing it down will help. I don't know. I just need someone to believe me. My brother Jason and I were on a road trip through the Appalachians last month. It was supposed to be a way for us to reconnect. We'd grown apart after college, and when our mom suggested we take this trip together, it seemed like a good idea. Jason's always been the adventurous one, wanting to take the scenic routes instead of highways. I should have insisted we stick to the main roads. We were somewhere in Western Virginia, I think. Jason had turned off the interstate hours before, taking these winding mountain roads that got narrower and more remote with each mile. The trees were so thick they blocked out most of the sunlight, and the roads twisted like snakes. It was beautiful in that wild, untamed way, but something about those woods made me uneasy even before everything went wrong. It started getting dark earlier than we expected. The trees and mountains blocked the sunset, and suddenly we were driving in this weird half-light. That's when our GPS went out, just stopped working completely. My phone showed no signal, and Jason's was the same. Not even emergency calls would go through. "It's fine," Jason kept saying. "We just need to find a town or get back to a main road." But we'd been driving for almost an hour with no signs of civilization, no houses, no gas stations, nothing. Just endless trees and that road that seemed to keep looping back on itself. Our gas gauge was getting lower, which is when I really started to worry. Then we saw the sign, this old wooden thing barely visible in our headlights. Hollow Creek, 2 miles. It was hand-painted and weathered, like something from another era. Jason immediately perked up. "See, we'll get gas there and figure out where we are." I remember feeling relieved, but also this weird sense of dread, like some part of me already knew what was waiting for us. The road to Hollow Creek descended sharply, winding down into this valley that seemed to appear out of nowhere. As we drove in, fog started rolling in from both sides of the road, these thick wisps that curled around the car like fingers. The temperature dropped suddenly. I remember the car's display showing it dropping from 62 degrees to 45 in just minutes. The town itself looked wrong from the moment we saw it. There were buildings, sure. What looked like a main street with old-fashioned storefronts, a small church with a bell tower, houses scattered beyond. But there were no lights except for a single flickering street lamp, and no people. Not one. No cars parked anywhere except for this ancient-looking pickup truck that was rusted through near what looked like a gas station. "This place looks abandoned," I said, but Jason was already pulling up to the gas station. "Let's just check, maybe they close early." The gas station was this old-style place with actual pumps, not digital ones. The small convenience store attached to it had a light on inside, which gave me a moment of hope. Jason tried the pumps, but nothing happened when he picked up the nozzle. "I'll go see if anyone's inside," he said, heading toward the store before I could stop him. I didn't want to be alone in the car, so I followed. The door to the store made this horrible creaking sound when Jason pushed it open, like it hadn't been used in years. Inside, a single bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly, though there was no breeze. The shelves were mostly empty, with a few ancient-looking cans and packages covered in dust. The place smelled musty and stale, like air that's been trapped too long. There was no one behind the counter, but there was a piece of paper pinned to the wall behind it. Jason went over and read it, then motioned for me to come look. It was written in shaky handwriting with what looked like pencil. "Don't stay after dark. If you hear them, don't answer. Leave before the moon is full." "What the hell does that mean?" I whispered, even though there was no one to hear us. Jason tried to laugh it off. Probably some local legend to scare tourists or kids messing around. But his voice was strained, and I could tell he was unnerved too. The sun had completely set by then, and the only light was coming from that one bulb above us and our car's headlights outside, which we'd left on. "Let's just go," I said. "This place is abandoned. We need to keep driving and find somewhere else." Jason nodded, and we headed back to the car. That's when I noticed the fog had gotten thicker, surrounding our car in a wall of white. And then I heard it, this soft whisper that seemed to come from the fog itself. I couldn't make out what it was saying at first, just this sound like dry leaves being rustled by wind. But then it became clearer, my name being called in this horrible, raspy voice that didn't sound human. "Sophie," it whispered, drawing out the syllables. "Sophie. Jason." Jason froze next to me. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, the single light bulb in the store behind us flickered and went out. At the same moment, our car's headlights dimmed and then died too, leaving us in almost complete darkness. The only light came from the moon, which was nearly full and somehow looked larger than it should have, casting this sickly glow through the fog. "Run!" Jason grabbed my arm, and we sprinted to the car. That's when I saw them, these tall, impossibly thin figures moving through the fog. They were just shadows at first, darker patches in the whiteness. But then I caught glimpses of long, skeletal fingers reaching out, and faces that were just empty hollows where features should be. We made it to the car, fumbling with the doors in panic. Jason's hands were shaking so badly he dropped the keys, and I screamed as I saw one of those things getting closer, gliding through the fog like it wasn't touching the ground. Jason finally got the door open, reached across to unlock mine, and we both tumbled in, slamming the doors shut. The car wouldn't start at first. Jason kept turning the key while I watched those figures surround us, pressing their hollow faces against the windows. The whispers got louder, turning into this chorus of voices calling our names, saying things I couldn't understand, but that filled me with dread. On the fourth try, the engine roared to life, and the headlights came back on, illuminating those things for a split second. I wish I hadn't seen them clearly. Their skin was like old parchment stretched over bones, with these gaping black holes where their eyes and mouths should be. They recoiled from the light, and Jason floored it, tires squealing as we tore away from the gas station. We sped through Hollow Creek, past buildings that seemed to be decaying before our eyes. I swear I saw faces watching from windows, not human faces, but something else. The fog rolled in thicker, and the road ahead kept disappearing and reappearing in our headlights. "We just need to get back to the main road," Jason kept saying, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. But the road we were on didn't seem to be the same one we'd come in on. It kept twisting, doubling back, leading us deeper into woods that seemed to press in on both sides. The whispers followed us. Even with the windows closed and the engine running, we could hear them calling, sometimes sounding like they were right in the back seat. The fog started seeping into the car somehow. these tendrils of white mist curling around our feet despite every vent being closed. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the road just ended. It didn't narrow or turn, it simply vanished into the fog and woods ahead. Jason slammed on the brakes and we sat there, engine idling, staring at where the pavement just stopped. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "Roads don't just end like this." He put the car in reverse, but before we could back up, the headlights illuminated something standing in the middle of the road behind us. It was one of those figures, taller than the others, its elongated arms hanging down past what should have been its knees. It didn't move as we stared at it, frozen in fear. Then it raised one skeletal hand and pointed at us. The whispers exploded around us, so loud now they were like screams in my ears. More figures appeared from the fog, surrounding the car completely. The car began to shake as they pressed against it from all sides. The temperature inside plummeted. I could see my breath, and frost started forming on the windows. Jason tried to back up, then drive forward, but the car wouldn't move. It was like we were stuck in place, even though the wheels were spinning. The fog inside the car got thicker, making it hard to breathe or see. The last thing I remember clearly is looking at Jason and seeing absolute terror on his face as one of those skeletal hands punched through the driver's side window, grabbing at him. I must have blacked out. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the side of a highway with a state trooper shaking my shoulder. Jason was next to me, still unconscious. Our car was nowhere to be seen. According to the trooper, a truck driver had spotted us lying in the breakdown lane at dawn and called it in. We were over 100 miles from where we should have been, in a completely different part of the state. Neither of us had any injuries except for these strange, ashy handprints on our arms that wouldn't wash off for days. Jason's wristwatch had stopped at exactly 3:15 a.m. and mine was missing entirely. The worst part, when they checked our IDs and ran our names, the trooper looked confused and made a call. Turns out we'd been reported missing 3 days earlier. We'd lost 3 entire days that we have no memory of. I've tried researching Hollow Creek since then. There's no record of any town by that name in the area we were traveling. No abandoned towns, nothing. Jason refuses to talk about what happened. He's thrown himself into work and pretends everything's fine. But I've seen him freezing up when fog rolls in, or looking over his shoulder when the wind makes whispering sounds. As for me, I can't sleep without a light on now. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and swear I can see fog seeping under my bedroom door, hear those whispers calling my name. And the moon, I can't look at the full moon anymore without feeling like something's watching me through it. The handprints finally faded from our skin, but sometimes, in the right light, I can still see the outlines, and I keep finding small patches of fog in places there shouldn't be. Inside my closed car on clear days, or in corners of my apartment when all the windows are shut. I don't know what happened to us in Hollow Creek, or what those things were, but I know they're not done with us. Last night, I found a note pushed under my door, the same shaky handwriting as the one in that store. "The moon will be full again soon." Story 4, a Kafai 12. I don't even know why I'm writing this down. Maybe to convince myself I'm not going crazy. Maybe because I need someone, anyone, to tell me they've experienced something similar. I've been replaying it in my head for days now, and I still can't make sense of it. It happened last Thursday. I was coming home from work, same as any other day. Nothing special about it. I work at a software company downtown. Not important what I do there. Just regular office stuff, coding, meetings, the usual soul-crushing routine. I left around 7 in the evening after staying late to finish a project. I live in an old Soviet-style apartment building in Novgrad. 12 stories of concrete that's been standing since the 70s. Nothing fancy, but it's home. I've been in apartment 8-4 for almost 3 years now. 8th floor, 4th apartment. I remember feeling tired that night. It had been a long day, and I was looking forward to just microwaving some leftovers and watching whatever was on TV. Normal stuff. I walked into the building lobby, nodded at the old security guard. He never actually provides security, just sits there doing crossword puzzles, and headed for the elevator. Our building has 2 elevators, but the left one has been under repair for months. No one's ever actually seen anyone working on it, so everyone uses the right one. It's old and cranky, metal doors that sometimes get stuck, buttons that don't light up properly, and this annoying buzzing sound it makes between floors. I pressed the call button and waited. The elevator came down with that familiar grinding noise. The doors opened with a rattle, and I stepped inside. The interior was the same as always. Scratched metal walls covered with years of graffiti that the building management had tried to clean off but only managed to smear. The floor had that worn-out rubber mat, and the light above flickered occasionally like it always did. I pressed 8 and the button lit up. The doors closed and the elevator started moving. That's when things got wrong. First, I noticed the sound. Usually the elevator makes this consistent humming noise as it goes up, punctuated by a soft clunk as it passes each floor. But this time, it made this repetitive thumping noise, almost like something was hitting against the shaft walls. Thump, 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 almost like a heartbeat, but mechanical. Then the light changed. The normal white fluorescent light suddenly flickered and turned this sickly yellow color. Not the warm yellow of an incandescent bulb, but this jaundiced, unnatural hue that made everything look diseased. I remember thinking the bulb must be dying, but the worst part, I felt the elevator moving down, not up-down, from the ground floor. That's impossible, right? There's no basement in our building. The ground floor is the bottom. Everyone knows that. I've lived here for years, and I've never seen a button for any floor below the ground level. I thought maybe I was just disoriented. But no, we were definitely descending. I could feel it in my stomach, that sensation when an elevator drops. I looked at the floor indicator above the door, but it wasn't working anymore, just that yellow light casting shadows across everything. I'm not usually a nervous person, but I'll admit I started to panic a little. I jabbed at the buttons. Ground floor, my floor, the emergency button, anything. But nothing happened. The elevator just kept going down, the thumping getting louder. After what felt like way too long for a normal elevator ride, it finally stopped with a jolt that nearly knocked me off my feet. The doors opened and I stepped out, just wanting to get away from whatever was happening. I found myself in what looked like a hallway on the 8th floor. At least, that's what I thought at first. The layout was familiar. The long corridor with apartments on both sides, the same awful floral wallpaper that's been there since forever, the same dim lighting, but something was off. The apartment numbers were wrong. Instead of our usual Roman numerals, we use those on the doors here, don't ask me why, some architect's weird choice. The numbers were in Arabic script, not just regular numbers, actual Arabic writing. I don't read Arabic, but I recognized the script from some of the international students at work. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. Was I in the wrong building somehow? But that was impossible. I had walked into my building. I knew the lobby, the security guard, the elevator. How could I be somewhere else? I walked down the hallway looking for some sign of where I was. That's when I saw it. Apartment 84, my apartment number. But the door, it wasn't my door. My door is dark brown with a peephole at eye level, a standard lock and a small scratch near the bottom where I once tried to move a bookshelf by myself and failed miserably. This door was lighter in color, almost reddish, with a grain pattern I'd never seen before. No peephole. The doormat wasn't my plain black one. This was some kind of woven material with patterns I couldn't make out in the dim light. But the strangest part was the keyhole. It protruded outward from the door, like some kind of small metal tube sticking out about an inch. I'd never seen anything like it, not in my building, not anywhere. I stood there staring at this door that should have been mine but wasn't, trying to understand what was happening. Was I dreaming, having some kind of stroke? I even pinched myself, as stupid as that sounds. Then I heard movement inside the apartment, footsteps approaching the door. I should have run. I should have immediately gone back to the elevator, but I was frozen in place, curiosity and fear keeping me rooted to the spot. The door opened. What I saw standing there I still can't properly describe it. My brain couldn't process it then, and it still can't now. It was roughly person-shaped, but the proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too thin in some places, too wide in others. Its skin, if you could call it that, seemed to shift and ripple, like it wasn't quite solid. And its face, God, its face. I can't even tell you what it looked like because my mind simply refused to register it. It was like looking at something through warped glass, where you can make out a general shape, but none of the details come through clearly. The thing made sounds. Not speech, not exactly, but something that had the cadence and rhythm of language. It sounded like someone talking underwater, or like when you play a tape recording backward, recognizable as communication but utterly incomprehensible. I backed away. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The thing moved forward, reaching out with what might have been an arm. I didn't wait to find out what it wanted. I turned and ran back to the elevator, slammed my hand against the call button. The doors were still open, thank God, and I practically threw myself inside, jabbing frantically at the ground floor button. The doors closed slowly, too slowly, and I caught one last glimpse of the thing moving down the hallway toward me. The elevator started moving, but the light went out completely. Total darkness. And the sensation, it wasn't like going up or down anymore. It was like falling sideways, if that makes any sense. Like gravity had turned on its side. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing and heartbeat. I had no idea if the elevator was moving or where it was taking me. For a moment, it felt like I was floating in nothingness, disconnected from everything. Then suddenly, the sickly yellow light flickered back on. I looked through the small window in the elevator door, hoping to see some sign of where I was, but there was nothing outside. Just darkness, complete, absolute darkness. I pressed the ground floor button again, desperate to get back to something familiar. The elevator started moving upward, and as it did, I could see through that little window that there was literally nothing outside. No shaft walls, no floors passing by, just a void. When the display finally showed G for ground floor, the darkness remained for several seconds before the light in the elevator flickered again, and suddenly everything looked normal. The light changed from that awful yellow back to regular white fluorescent, and I could see the familiar lobby through the window. But the doors didn't open. Without me pressing anything, the elevator started moving up. I watched in disbelief as the floor numbers ticked by. 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 8. When it stopped and the doors opened, I was on my floor. The real one. Roman numerals on the doors. My apartment at the end of the hall, with my normal door and normal keyhole. The whole thing, from getting in the elevator to arriving at my actual floor, couldn't have taken more than a couple of minutes. But it felt like hours. I unlocked my door with shaking hands and went inside, locked it behind me, and then checked every room, every closet, under the bed, everywhere. Everything was normal. My stuff was all there. Nothing had changed. I didn't sleep that night, or much since then, to be honest. I've been taking the stairs despite living on the 8th floor. I've asked a few neighbors if they've ever experienced anything strange in the elevator, but they just look at me like I'm crazy. Maybe I am. Maybe I had some kind of hallucination or episode, but it felt so real. The yellow light, the wrong door, that thing, whatever it was. I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd let that thing touch me, or what would have happened if the elevator hadn't brought me back. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear that thumping sound coming through the walls. Thump, 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 like something's trying to find its way back to me. Story 5. I've always been a city person at heart, but after 6 months of crushing deadlines at my marketing job, I desperately needed to disconnect. My therapist kept suggesting nature therapy to help with my anxiety, so I finally gave in. I researched hiking trails and found Pine Hollow, a remote area in the Appalachians that promised solitude and stunning views. The online reviews mentioned how peaceful it was, a place where you could truly escape. If only I'd known what that really meant. I arrived at the trailhead parking lot around 11 in the morning last Wednesday. The lot was empty except for my Honda Civic, which should have been my first warning sign. I remember checking my phone one last time before putting it on airplane mode to conserve battery. Full signal, then nothing. I had downloaded offline maps and told my sister I'd be back Friday afternoon. I packed light, but had all the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, water filter, 3 days of food, first aid kit, and a good flashlight. The beginning of the hike was exactly what I needed. The trail wound through a forest of oak and maple trees, their leaves creating dappled patterns of sunlight on the ground. I remember feeling the tension melting from my shoulders as I walked deeper into the woods. I even stopped to take pictures of a family of deer grazing in a small meadow. They watched me cautiously, but didn't run away. Now I wonder if they were trying to warn me. Around 2 hours into the hike, I noticed something odd. The bird songs that had been so prevalent were fading. At first, I thought maybe it was just a quiet period, or perhaps the birds were less active in this part of the forest. But by hour 3, the silence was absolute. No chirping, no rustling in the underbrush, not even the buzz of insects. Just my footsteps and breathing. The forest had gone completely, unnaturally silent. I tried to shake off my unease. It's just your city brain getting used to real quiet, I told myself. I pushed on, following the trail as it climbed higher into the mountains. The trees changed from deciduous to pine, growing taller and closer together. Their needles carpeted the ground, muffling my footsteps. The trail was becoming fainter, less maintained, but I continued following the markers, small blue blazes painted on tree trunks. By late afternoon, I found what seemed like the perfect campsite, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. A creek bubbled nearby, providing easy access to water. I set up my tent, collected firewood, and prepared an early dinner. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks visible through gaps in the canopy, I felt at peace. I remember thinking, this is exactly what I needed. I was so wrong. The darkness that fell over Pine Hollow wasn't like any night I'd experienced before. It wasn't just dark. It was an absolute absence of light that my headlamp seemed to barely penetrate. The stars that should have been visible through the breaks in the trees were obscured by what I assumed were clouds. The temperature dropped dramatically, forcing me to put on an extra layer even though it was summer. I was inside my tent, reading a paperback thriller on my Kindle when I first heard them. Whispers, so faint at first that I thought it might be the wind through the pine needles. I turned off my Kindle and listened. Nothing. Just as I convinced myself it was my imagination, they started again. Multiple voices, too distant to make out words, but clearly voices having a conversation. My first thought was other campers. Relief washed over me. I wasn't alone out here after all. I grabbed my flashlight and stuck my head out of the tent. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" The whispers stopped immediately. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on me. I swept my flashlight around the clearing, but the beam seemed weaker than before, barely reaching the tree line. I called out again, louder this time. Nothing. I zipped up my tent and tried to return to my book, but couldn't focus. The whispers returned, seemingly closer now. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I put on my hiking boots, grabbed my flashlight and a small can of bear spray, and stepped outside. The air felt different, heavier, colder, like walking through invisible cobwebs. I called out again as I approached the tree line where I thought the whispers were coming from. They stopped again, then resumed from a different direction, deeper in the forest. I hesitated, knowing I shouldn't go off trail at night, but something about those whispers pulled at me. They seemed almost familiar, like they were calling my name, though I couldn't make out any distinct words. I made sure to keep track of my campsite, frequently looking back at the small orange glow of my solar lantern outside my tent. I walked maybe 50 yards into the trees, following the sound. The whispers grew louder, then faded, then came from another direction entirely. I realized I was being led around in circles. When I turned to go back, I couldn't see my lantern anymore. Panic surged through me. I had only gone a short distance. I should be able to see my campsite. I tried to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. The trees seemed to have closed in, creating walls of darkness. My flashlight beam weakened further, now only illuminating a few feet in front of me. That's when I saw the first one. Between two massive pines, maybe 15 feet away, stood a figure. Pale, almost translucent, humanoid but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. In the dim light, I could make out hollow eyes that seemed to absorb what little illumination my flashlight provided. It didn't move, just watched me. I froze, unable to scream, unable to run. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. I blinked, and it was gone. My paralysis broke and I ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping my face. I tripped over a root and fell hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. As I lay there gasping, I saw more of them. 3 figures standing in a semicircle around me, just at the edge of my flashlight's range. They made no move to approach, just stood watching with those empty eyes. The whispers grew louder, coming from everywhere and nowhere. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone felt ancient, curious, and somehow hungry. I scrambled to my feet and ran again, in what I hoped was the direction of my camp. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, miraculously, I broke through the trees into my clearing. My tent was there, the solar lantern still glowing faintly. I dove inside, zipped it up, and huddled in my sleeping bag, shaking uncontrollably. The whispers continued outside, circling my tent, sometimes so close it sounded like they were right next to the thin fabric. I didn't sleep. How could I? I kept my flashlight on all night, watching the shadows that moved across the tent walls. Sometimes I would see the silhouettes of the figures, impossibly tall and thin, standing perfectly still outside. I clutched my bear spray, knowing it would be useless against whatever these things were. Around 3 in the morning, the whispers changed. They became more urgent, almost argumentative. Then, gradually, they moved away, fading into the forest. The shadows retreated. By the time dawn broke, bringing a pale gray light filtering through the trees, the presence was gone. I packed up camp in record time, not bothering with breakfast or even filtering water. I just needed to get out. The forest was still unnaturally quiet as I hit the trail, moving as quickly as I could without running. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I would see those figures following me. About an hour into my hike, I heard the first bird call, then another. Gradually, the normal sounds of the forest returned. Rustling leaves, chirping insects, the occasional scurrying in the underbrush. The trees thinned out, changing back from pine to oak and maple. The sun broke through the canopy, warming my face. I should have felt relieved, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times I spun around, certain I'd catch one of those pale figures following me, but there was never anything there, at least nothing I could see. Yet I knew, with absolute certainty, that they were there, just beyond my perception, watching and waiting. When I finally reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove away much too fast on the winding mountain road, only slowing down when I reached the highway. It's been 5 days since I left Pine Hollow. I've researched the area extensively, looking for similar accounts or local legends. I found a few vague stories about hikers going missing and old tales from settlers about watching spirits in those mountains, but nothing concrete. Last night, I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of whispers outside my bedroom window. I live on the 14th floor of my apartment building. When I finally gathered the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. Just the city lights and empty streets below. But I know what I heard. I don't know what those things in Pine Hollow were. I don't know if they meant me harm or were just curious. What I do know is that they haven't let me go. Sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of tall, pale figures in crowds or down dark hallways. They're watching, waiting. For what? I don't know. I won't be going back to the mountains. Some places in the wilderness hold secrets that should remain undisturbed, but I'm afraid it's too late for me. I disturbed something in Pine Hollow, and now it's followed me home. Story 6. I still can't sleep without lights on. It's been 3 years since everything happened, but I swear I can still feel her watching me. Not my grandmother. No, I could handle that. It's the other one, the angry one, Isabella. I never thought our family would be touched by something like this. We're just normal people from Montero, a small town in Honduras where everyone knows everyone's business. My name is Marco, and until 2020, I thought the scariest thing in my life would be failing my university entrance exams. It all started with a dream I had that I can't shake from my memory. In it, I saw my abuela Elena sitting in her favorite chair. You know, that old wooden rocking chair with the faded cushions she refused to replace. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood her sister Isabella, who had died about 5 years earlier. Isabella wasn't looking at Elena like families should. Her eyes were wrong, filled with hatred. She was staring at my grandmother with such intense anger that even in my dream, I felt my stomach twist. I woke up sweating and told my mom about it over breakfast. She just laughed it off, said I was watching too many horror movies. "Dreams are just dreams, Marco," she said, pouring me more coffee. "Your abuela is fine." 2 days later, she wasn't fine at all. I was coming home from school when I heard my abuela screaming, not like she was hurt, more like she was terrified. I dropped my backpack in the hallway and ran to the living room where I found her standing in the middle of the room, pointing at the empty corner by the TV. "Está allí. Isabella está allí." She kept yelling. "She's there. Isabella is there." But the corner was empty, at least to me. My mom rushed in from the kitchen, still holding a wooden spoon covered in beans. She grabbed Abuela's shoulders, trying to calm her down. Abuela was shaking, her eyes never leaving that corner. "She's angry with me," Abuela whispered. "She's come to take me." My mom told me to get Abuela some water, and I ran to the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I spilled half of it. When I came back, Abuela had stopped screaming. She was sitting on the couch, breathing hard, while my mom rubbed her back. I handed her the glass, and she took it with trembling hands. "Gracias, Marquito," she said, using her pet name for me. I remember thinking how small she looked in that moment, how fragile. She took one sip of water, set the glass down on the coffee table, looked up at my mom and said, "Isabella is here." Then her eyes rolled back in her head and she collapsed, just like that. No dramatic gasping, no clutching her chest. She simply fell sideways onto the couch. The next few minutes were chaos. My mom screaming, me calling the ambulance, my dad rushing home from work. But it was too late. By the time the paramedics arrived, my abuela Elena was gone. "Heart attack," they said. "Common for a woman her age, nothing suspicious," but I knew better. I had seen the fear in her eyes. After the funeral, we had to clean out Abuela's room. My parents were too upset, so the task fell to me. I didn't mind. It gave me time alone with her things, a way to say goodbye. I was emptying her dresser drawers when I found the first strange thing. A small cloth bag filled with dirt, tied with red string. It was hidden beneath her folded sweaters. I thought it was weird, but figured it might be some plant thing. Abuela always had weird remedies for everything. Then I found another one in her nightstand and another under her mattress. 7 bags in total, all identical, all hidden carefully around her room. The last drawer I checked contained something that made my blood run cold. A wooden board with letters and numbers painted on it. A Ouija board, homemade, not store-bought. Next to it was a notebook filled with strange symbols, names I didn't recognize, and dates going back 20 years. I'd never known my grandmother to be interested in anything like this. She went to church every Sunday, had crucifixes on every wall. Finding out she had been practicing whatever this was, it felt like discovering a stranger had been living in our house. I took the notebook and sat on her bed, flipping through the pages. Most of it was in code, or so messy I couldn't read it. But one entry from about 6 years ago was clear. "Isabella is getting worse. The doctors say months, not years. I will try one more time tonight. If the spirits can help her, I must try. Isabella." my great-aunt, who died of breast cancer. She had moved in with us during her last months, so Abuela could take care of her. I was just 14 then, but I remember how bitter Isabella had become toward the end. While everyone was at work or school, she was stuck at home with Abuela, who was her caretaker. She resented being left alone, being sick while everyone else's lives went on. She died angry at the world, angry at her own body for betraying her, and now it seemed Abuela had been trying to help her through witchcraft. It didn't make sense. The Elena I knew would never touch something like that. I kept reading, and the entries got stranger. The board worked. They answered me. They say they can help Isabella, but they need offerings, small things. They are hungry. And later, Isabella is not responding to treatments. The spirits asked for more. I gave them what they wanted, but now I'm afraid they've taken too much from me. I feel them watching. The last entry was dated just a month before my dream. I can't sleep. Isabella visits me at night, not in dreams. She stands at the foot of my bed. She doesn't speak, but I know she blames me. The board is hidden now, but it's too late. They're already here. God forgive me. I closed the notebook, feeling sick. Had my grandmother somehow opened a door she couldn't close? Had she invited something into our home thinking she could help her sister? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the notebook under my pillow, not wanting my parents to find it. They were Catholic to the core. This would destroy them. Around 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally took over, and I drifted off. The dream came immediately. I was standing in our living room, but everything was slightly wrong. The furniture was in different places, the colors faded. Abuela Elena was walking around the room, touching things, looking sad. She turned to me and opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Then I noticed someone lying on the floor behind her. I couldn't see who it was, just a shape under a white sheet. Blood was seeping through the fabric, spreading in a perfect circle. Abuela pointed at the body, then at me, then drew her finger across her throat. I woke up gasping, grabbing at my wrist where I always wore the rosary bracelet my grandmother had given me for my confirmation. It wasn't there. I turned on my lamp and searched my bed, the floor around it, even under the pillow. The bracelet was gone. I never took it off. Never. Not even to shower. The clasp was sturdy. It couldn't have just fallen off. I got out of bed and turned on every light in my room. That's when I noticed my door was open a crack. I always closed it at night because the sound of my parents' TV bothered me. With shaking hands, I got down on my knees and looked under my bed. Nothing. Then I checked my desk, my bookshelf, everywhere. Finally, I looked in the last place I wanted to, the center of my room. There it was, my rosary bracelet arranged in a perfect circle on my carpet. I stood there staring at it, unable to move. I hadn't put it there. I know I hadn't. My parents found me the next morning, sitting in the corner of my room, all the lights on, clutching the rosary so tightly the beads had left marks in my palm. I told them everything, about the dream, about what I'd found in Abuela's room, about the bracelet. Dad thought I was having some kind of breakdown from grief. Mom was more concerned, especially when I showed her the notebook. She recognized her mother's handwriting but refused to believe Elena would have dabbled in such things. "Your grandmother was a good Catholic woman," she insisted. "This must be research for something, or stories she was writing." But I could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear. She knew, just like I did, that something wasn't right. That afternoon, without telling my parents, I went back to Abuela's room and gathered everything I'd found, the dirt bags, the board, the notebook, and took them to the backyard. I doused it all in lighter fluid and burned it. I watched until there was nothing left but ashes, which I buried deep in the garden. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That night, I refused to sleep in my room. I camped out on the living room couch with all the lights on, the TV playing softly for company. I must have dozed off around dawn because I dreamed again. This time I saw Isabella clearly. She was standing in our kitchen, looking healthier than I ever remembered her in life. She was smiling, but not in a nice way. "She opened the door," Isabella said, her voice like dry leaves scraping concrete. Now it stays open, one by one, until there's no one left. I jerked awake to find my mother standing over me, looking concerned. "You were talking in your sleep," she said. "Something about a door?" I couldn't tell her. I couldn't put that fear on her, so I just said I couldn't remember and asked for breakfast. For weeks after that, strange things happened in our house. Lights turning on and off, items disappearing and reappearing in odd places, cold spots in rooms that had never been cold before. My parents blamed faulty wiring, forgetfulness, the old air conditioning system, but I knew better. I started sleeping with salt around my bed, something I read about online. I wore religious medals. I prayed every night, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. Nothing helped. The dreams continued. Sometimes with Abuela, sometimes with Isabella, sometimes with figures I didn't recognize, always with the same message, one by one. I started to think Isabella, or whatever was pretending to be Isabella, wanted to finish what she'd started with Abuela. She wanted to take us all, one by one, until our family was gone. 3 years later, I still live with that fear. I moved out as soon as I could, hoping distance would help. It hasn't. The dreams follow me. Less frequent now, but still there. My parents still live in that house. They refuse to leave. It's been in our family for generations. My mom found a priest to bless the place, but I don't think it helped. Dad had a stroke last year, survived, but barely. The doctors said it was stress and genetics. I think it was something else. I'm writing this now because last night, for the first time in months, I had the dream again. Isabella was standing at the foot of my bed looking solid as you or me. She smiled and held up 3 fingers, then folded one down, then another. 1 finger left, one by one, until there's no one left. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop what my grandmother started. All I know is that I won't sleep tonight, or tomorrow night, for as long as I can manage, because I think I'm next. Story 7. I'm still shaking as I type this. It's been 2 days since I got back from Pine Ridge, and I haven't been able to sleep more than a couple hours at a time. I keep seeing things in the corners of my vision, and I swear I can still hear those whispers when it gets quiet. I need to write this down while it's still fresh. Maybe someone here can tell me I'm not losing my mind. Last weekend I decided I needed to get away from everything. Work stress, my recent breakup, the constant noise of the city. I've always found peace in nature, so a solo camping trip seemed perfect. I chose Pine Ridge because it's only about 3 hours from my apartment but feels completely removed from civilization. When I told my friends where I was heading, their reactions were concerning. Mike got really quiet and asked if I was sure about going there alone. Sarah straight up told me to pick another spot. When I pressed them, Mike mentioned rumors about shadow people in those woods. Apparently, his cousin went camping there last year and came back refusing to talk about what happened. I laughed it off as campfire stories. I wish I'd listened. I arrived at Pine Ridge around noon on Saturday. The parking area was completely empty, which should have been my first warning sign. It was a perfect spring weekend. Where were the other hikers? I remember standing at the trailhead, looking at my fully loaded backpack in the trunk and having this sudden urge to just drive back home. But I pushed that feeling away. I told myself I was being ridiculous. The first hour of hiking was beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the trees, birds were singing, and I started to feel that peace I was looking for. But as I went deeper, things began to change. The forest got denser, the trees taller and closer together. I noticed the bird songs had stopped. The silence was complete, the kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. Around 3 o'clock, I found a small clearing that seemed perfect for camping. As I was setting up my tent, I noticed something odd about the shadows under the trees. They seemed darker than they should be, and a couple times I could have sworn they moved when there was no wind. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks after staring at my phone for too long before the trip. I finished setting up camp, cooked a simple dinner on my portable stove, and watched the sunset through the trees. As darkness fell, the forest took on an entirely different character. The silence became heavier, more oppressive. I built a small fire, but instead of feeling comforted by it, the dancing flames made the surrounding darkness seem even deeper, the shadows even more active. Around 10 o'clock, I crawled into my tent. I was exhausted, but found it hard to fall asleep. The forest was too quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. And then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it, whispering. So faint I almost missed it. It sounded like someone standing just outside my tent, murmuring words I couldn't quite make out. I sat up, heart pounding, and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The whispering stopped immediately. I unzipped the tent and shined my flashlight around the clearing. Nothing, just those unnaturally dark shadows at the edge of the trees. I convinced myself it was just the wind, even though there was no wind that night, not even a breeze. I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, the whispering would start again, a little louder each time. By morning, I was exhausted and on edge, but the sunlight made everything seem normal again. I decided to explore a bit, thinking a hike would clear my head. I followed a faint trail deeper into the forest. The trees grew even closer together here, blocking most of the sunlight. The air felt colder, damper. After about an hour of hiking, I came across something I hadn't expected, a cabin. It was small and obviously abandoned, with a partially collapsed roof and a door hanging off its hinges. Common sense told me to leave it alone, but curiosity won out. I carefully pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was a single room with rotting floorboards and a rusted wood stove in one corner. A small table stood in the center, covered in dust, and on the table were photographs, old, faded black and white images of people standing in front of the very same cabin, but in much better condition. I picked up one of the photos. It showed a family, parents and 2 children, all smiling stiffly at the camera. Something about their eyes bothered me. They looked hollow somehow. I put the photo down and noticed something carved into the table's surface. "They come at night." The whispering started again, but this time it wasn't outside my tent. It was right there in the cabin with me, and this time I could make out words. "Stay with us. Help us. Don't leave us alone." I dropped the photograph and backed away. The whispers grew louder, seeming to come from every direction at once. I ran out of the cabin, not even bothering to close the door behind me. I sprinted back the way I'd come, branches scratching my face and arms as I pushed through the undergrowth. When I finally reached my campsite, I was out of breath and shaking. The sun was already starting to set. I'd spent more time in that cabin than I thought. I debated packing up and hiking back to my car in the dark, but the thought of getting lost in those woods at night terrified me more than staying put. I rebuilt my fire, making it bigger than before, and sat with my back against a tree facing the flames. I didn't want to be in my tent tonight. I needed to see what was coming. The darkness seemed to close in faster than it should have. My fire pushed it back, but only so far. And as the night deepened, I noticed the shadows at the edge of the clearing were darker than they had any right to be, and they were moving, not shifting with the firelight, but moving independently, like living things. At first, I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, my eyes playing tricks from exhaustion, but then I saw them, figures forming in the darkness between the trees. They were humanoid but wrong somehow, too tall, too thin, with limbs that moved at impossible angles. They stood at the very edge of the firelight, just watching. I sat frozen, clutching my knife, as if that would do anything against whatever they were. Hours passed like this, me staring at them staring back with faces I couldn't make out. The whispering started again, louder than before, a chorus of voices saying things like, "Join us," and "We've been so lonely," and "You can't leave now." Around 3 in the morning, one of them took a step forward into the light. I saw its face, or what should have been a face. It was like a human face that had been twisted, with features that were recognizable but wrong. Its eyes were just empty sockets, and its mouth was frozen in a silent scream. That was when I broke. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. I didn't take anything else. Not my tent, not my backpack, nothing. Just my flashlight and the clothes on my back. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping my face. I could hear them behind me, moving through the trees with unnatural speed and grace. The whispering followed me, growing more insistent, more angry. I had no idea where I was going. I just ran away from the voices, away from those things. Somehow, I ended up at the edge of a cliff I hadn't seen during the day. I skidded to a stop just in time, sending rocks tumbling over the edge. I could hear them hitting the ground far below. I turned around, my back to the cliff, and shined my flashlight at the trees. They were there, dozens of them now, emerging from the shadows. In the harsh light, I could see them clearly. They weren't shadows anymore, but something solid, something real. Each had that same twisted face, those same hollow eyes, those same screaming mouths. And as I watched, they began to change, their features shifting, becoming more defined, more familiar. One of them, the one in front, had a face that was resolving into something I recognized. It was the man from the photograph in the cabin, and behind him, the woman and the two children, all with those hollow eyes and screaming mouths. I edged along the cliff, trying to find a way around them. They matched my movements, keeping me trapped. The whispering had become a constant drone. Stay, stay, stay. I don't know how long we were locked in that standoff. Eventually, the sky began to lighten. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, the figures seemed to lose substance. They became translucent, then transparent, then nothing but darker patches among the shadows. The whispering faded with them. As soon as they were gone, I ran again. Somehow, miraculously, I found the trail. I followed it back to my car, running the whole way, even though my legs were about to give out. I drove home in a daze, stopping only when I absolutely had to for gas. I haven't told anyone about this until now. Who would believe me? I keep telling myself it was sleep deprivation, or that someone slipped something into my water bottle, or that I just had some kind of breakdown. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The strangest part? When I got home and checked my phone, I found I'd taken a picture in that cabin. I don't remember doing it. The photo shows the table with those old photographs, and when I zoom in on them, I can see my own face staring back from one of them, hollow-eyed, mouth open in a silent scream. I keep hearing the whispers at night. They're getting louder, and the shadows in my apartment seem darker than they should be. Story 8. I still get chills thinking about it. It's been almost 3 years, but I can't shake what happened that night. I've been driving trucks for PAM Transport out of El Paso for nearly 8 years now, and I've seen some weird shit on the road. Dead animals, strange hitchhikers, even what I thought was a ghost once near Marfa. But nothing comes close to what happened that night near Sanderson. It was a Tuesday in late October, around 1 in the morning. The kind of night where the desert gets so dark, you can't tell where the land ends and the sky begins. I was hauling a load of electronics heading east on Highway 90 with my driving partner Miriam. She's been with the company longer than me, mid-40s, tough as nails, seen it all. At least that's what I thought. We'd been driving for about 16 hours, taking turns at the wheel. It was my shift, and Miriam was supposed to be sleeping in the back, but she couldn't. Said something about the energy feeling off that night. I laughed it off. Miriam's always been a bit superstitious. Her grandmother was some kind of curandera back in Juarez, so she grew up with all those stories. The stretch of highway near Sanderson is probably one of the most isolated parts of Texas. Nothing but scrubland, cactus, and rocky hills for miles. The closest town is Marathon, and that's barely a blip on the map. Cell service is spotty at best. You're truly alone out there. We'd just come around this big hill and hit us straight away when I saw it. My high beams cut through the darkness, and there it was, crossing the road maybe 50 yards ahead. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe a javelina or a really big coyote. But no, this thing was all wrong. It was running on all fours, but not like any animal I've ever seen. Its body was long, maybe 8 feet from nose to tail, and its back stood as high as a VW Beetle's roof. The way it moved was unnatural, like its joints bent in ways they shouldn't. but it was the details that made my blood run cold. It had these spikes running down its back, almost like an iguana, but bigger. Its legs were thick and muscular, again reminding me of an iguana, but scaled up to this monstrous size. The head was relatively small compared to its body, pointed, almost dog-like, but not quite, and the eyes, Jesus Christ, the eyes. They glowed red in my headlights, not just reflecting like a normal animal's would, but actually emitting light, like two burning coals. The weirdest part was its tail, bushy like a raccoon's, completely out of place on this reptilian-looking thing, and its skin. It was covered in brownish hair or fur, but underneath, especially on its flanks where the hair was thinner, there was this glossy greenish tint that caught the light. It all happened in seconds. The creature darted across the road and up the hill on the right side just as we passed by. I instinctively hit the brakes, slowing the rig down. "Did you fucking see that?" I yelled, my heart hammering against my ribs. I glanced over at Miriam. She was frozen, her face drained of color, clutching the dashboard with white knuckles. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Don't stop," she whispered. "Por favor, Miguel, don't stop." "But what the hell was that thing?" I asked, still slowing down, part of me wanting to back up and make sure I wasn't hallucinating. "Just drive!" she screamed, her voice cracking. I'd never heard Miriam scream before. Not when we nearly jackknifed outside of Amarillo in a snowstorm. Not when that drunk driver almost sideswiped us near Dallas. Never. I pressed the accelerator, bringing us back up to speed. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel steady. "What was that?" I asked again, quieter this time. Miriam was making the sign of the cross, muttering prayers under her breath. She didn't answer me for what felt like forever. "My grandmother told me stories," she finally said, her voice barely audible over the engine. "El chupacabra, it takes livestock, drains them of blood." Under normal circumstances, I would have laughed. The chupacabra was just a myth, something to scare kids or explain dead goats. But after what I'd just seen, I wasn't laughing. "That's just stories, Miriam," I said, trying to convince myself more than her. "You saw it," she replied simply. The next hour was the longest of my life. We drove in near silence, both scanning the darkness outside our windows. Every shadow seemed to move. Every cactus looked like it might be that thing, waiting. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see those glowing red eyes behind us. We passed through Sanderson, just a handful of buildings and streetlights in the middle of nowhere, without stopping. Normally, we would have pulled over at the truck stop there to stretch our legs, but neither of us suggested it. We just wanted to get as far away as possible. Around 2:30, we pulled into a larger truck stop in Ozona, about 70 miles east of where we saw the creature. I needed coffee, and we both needed to be around other people, other trucks, lights, civilization. The fluorescent lights of the truck stop felt like the safest place in the world. There were 3 other trucks parked in the lot, and a couple of local guys nursing coffees at the counter inside. Normal, ordinary. It helped ground me back in reality. "I'm going to use the bathroom," Miriam said, her voice steadier now but still strained. I nodded and ordered 2 coffees from a sleepy-eyed waitress. When Miriam came back, she looked a little better. She'd splashed water on her face, but her eyes still had that haunted look. "Those ranches we passed," she said quietly, stirring sugar into her coffee. "They all have goats, hundreds of them." She was right. That area was known for goat ranching, and the stories always said the chupacabra went after goats. "And we're only about 20 miles from the border," I added, remembering the news reports I'd heard over the years about strange animal deaths in northern Mexico. "There have been sightings down there." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of what we'd seen settling over us. "You know," I said, trying to find a rational explanation. "Maybe it was just a coyote with mange. They can look pretty weird when they lose their fur." Miriam gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it. "Coyotes don't have spikes, Miguel, or glowing eyes, or green skin." She was right, of course. Whatever we saw, it wasn't a coyote with mange. It wasn't anything I could explain. Maybe it was a skinwalker, I suggested, remembering stories from my Navajo friend back in El Paso. Miriam shook her head. Skinwalkers take human form, or they look like normal animals. That wasn't normal. We finished our coffee and got back on the road. I let Miriam take the wheel. My hands were still shaking too much. I couldn't sleep though. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red eyes. For the next few days, we barely talked about what happened. It was like we both silently agreed to pretend it didn't occur. We finished our haul to Houston, picked up a new load, and headed back west. We took Interstate 10 on the return trip, even though it was longer. Neither of us wanted to go through Sanderson again. About a week later, I was at home, unable to sleep as usual since that night. I turned on the radio and caught the tail end of Coast to Coast AM, that late-night show that talks about aliens and conspiracy theories and stuff. I was about to change the station when I heard the host introduce a caller, a trucker from Oklahoma. My blood ran cold as I listened to this guy describe, in detail, the exact same creature we had seen. Same spikes, same glowing eyes, same weird raccoon tail. He'd seen it near Sierra Blanca, on the western edge of Texas, not far from El Paso. I nearly crashed my car trying to find my phone to call into the show, but by the time I got through, they'd moved on to talking about alien abductions. I never got the trucker's name or how to contact him. That's when I knew for sure what we saw was real. It wasn't a hallucination brought on by fatigue or road hypnosis. It wasn't a weird coyote or a deer with a deformity. It was something else entirely. I've been back through West Texas dozens of times since then. I always drive that stretch with my high beams on, scanning the darkness. I've never seen the creature again, but I know it's out there. Miriam requested a transfer to the Midwest routes shortly after our experience. Can't say I blame her. She has family in northern Mexico, where the stories of El Chupacabra originated. For her, this wasn't just a scary encounter, it was confirmation of the nightmares she'd grown up hearing about. As for me, I still drive the Texas routes. Someone has to. But I don't drive at night through Sanderson anymore if I can help it, and I always keep my eyes on the hills along Highway 90, watching for movement, for that strange silhouette, for those glowing red eyes. I've told this story to a few other drivers. Most laugh it off or suggest I was tired and seeing things. One old-timer said he'd heard similar stories from drivers going back to the 90s, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through those empty stretches of desert highway, I feel like it's watching me too, waiting for me to break down, to be alone and vulnerable in its territory. So if you're ever driving through West Texas at night, especially near Sanderson, keep your eyes open and your doors locked. And if you see a brownish shape with a raccoon tail and glowing red eyes, don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop. Story 9. I still can't explain what happened that night back in 2005. I was 13 then, living in Pinewood with my dad after my parents split up. We didn't have much, but we had our routines. Every Friday evening, Dad would pick me up from my friend Jacob's house in his old Ford pickup, and we'd take the long way home through the countryside. It was our thing. Just driving, talking about school, sports, whatever. Sometimes we'd stop for ice cream at Millie's on the edge of town if I'd had a good week at school. This particular Friday in October started like any other. The weather was getting cooler and the leaves were changing. Dad picked me up around 7 in the evening. I remember climbing into the truck, tossing my backpack on the floor, and complaining about the math test I'd bombed earlier that day. Dad just laughed and said, "Well, Danny boy, can't be good at everything, can ya?" We took our usual route home, down Miller Road, past the old Johnson farm, and onto Pinewood Drive, which cut through about 5 miles of dense forest before reaching our neighborhood. The road was narrow, just 2 lanes with no streetlights, and the trees formed this sort of tunnel overhead. Dad always drove slower on this stretch, especially as it got dark. He'd hit a raccoon once and felt terrible about it for weeks. It was around 7:30, already pretty dark. Dad had the high beams on, and we were maybe 3 miles into the woods when it happened. I was fiddling with the radio, trying to find something other than country music, when Dad suddenly slammed on the brakes. "Whoa!" he shouted as I lurched forward against my seatbelt. A deer, a big buck with impressive antlers, had jumped right across the road in front of us. Dad's quick reaction had prevented us from hitting it, but that's not what made this moment sear into my memory forever. The deer wasn't just crossing the road, it was running for its life, and what was chasing it? I still get goosebumps thinking about it. About 20 feet behind the deer, moving through the woods parallel to the road, was a light. But calling it a light doesn't come close to describing what we saw. It was like a ball of pure, white-hot energy, maybe the size of a softball at its center, but radiating so intensely that it lit up everything around it, the trees, the underbrush, even the inside of our truck cab. It cast no shadows, just pure, uniform illumination that made everything look weirdly flat and unnatural. Dad had stopped the truck completely by this point. Neither of us said a word. We just watched, frozen, as this thing pursued the deer. The light moved about 5 feet off the ground, weaving through the trees at incredible speed, I'd guess around 50 miles per hour. What struck me immediately was how it navigated the dense forest. It never once touched a tree or branch. It moved with this fluid precision that seemed intelligent, like it knew exactly where it was going and what it was doing, and it was completely silent. Absolutely no sound, no hum, no buzz, no whoosh, nothing. Just this intense, brilliant light cutting through the darkness, locked onto that deer like a heat-seeking missile. I remember pressing my face against the passenger window, my breath fogging up the glass. The deer bounded through the underbrush, clearly terrified, making sharp turns and zigzags, trying to lose whatever was chasing it. But the light matched every move perfectly, maintaining the same distance, never gaining or falling behind. Dad rolled down his window and stuck his head out slightly. "Do you see that?" he whispered, his voice shaky. "Yeah," was all I could manage to say back. The light didn't change color, didn't flicker, didn't vary in brightness. It was just this constant, perfect sphere of energy. Not like a flashlight beam or headlights. There was no visible source, no beam direction. It was just there, existing, moving with purpose. As they disappeared deeper into the woods, I could still see glimpses of the light between the trees. The whole encounter probably lasted only 30 seconds, but it felt like time had slowed down. When we could no longer see it, Dad and I turned to each other simultaneously. "Did you see that?" We both blurted out at the exact same time, which under different circumstances might have been funny. Dad put the truck in park and turned on the interior light. His face was pale, and I'm sure mine was too. He ran his hand through his hair, something he did when he was nervous. "What the hell was that?" he asked, not really expecting me to have an answer. I shook my head. "I don't know, it wasn't normal." We sat there for a few minutes trying to process what we'd witnessed. Dad suggested maybe it was some kind of experimental drone, but even as he said it, I could tell he didn't believe it. This was 2005. Consumer drones weren't really a thing yet, and even military drones couldn't have navigated through dense forest like that, let alone produce that kind of light. "Swamp gas?" I suggested, repeating something I'd heard on some TV show about UFOs. Dad shook his head. "It's October, Danny. Too cold for swamp gas. And swamp gas doesn't chase deer." After about 10 minutes of sitting there, Dad finally put the truck back in drive. "Let's get home," he said quietly. We drove the rest of the way in silence, both lost in our thoughts. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light weaving through the trees. I kept wondering what happened to the deer. Did it escape, or did the light catch up to it, and what would have happened if it had? The next morning, Dad suggested we go back to the spot and look around. I was hesitant. Part of me was scared to return, but curiosity won out. We drove out there around noon, finding the approximate location based on landmarks we remembered. There was nothing unusual to be found. No scorched earth, no strange markings, no dead deer, just normal woods. We walked around for about an hour, searching for anything out of the ordinary, but came up empty. Over the next few days, Dad asked around town if anyone else had seen anything strange that night. No one had. He even called the local sheriff's office, casually inquiring if there had been any reports of unusual lights or phenomena. The deputy he spoke to just laughed and asked if he'd been drinking. Dad stopped bringing it up after that. I think he was worried people would think he was crazy, but in private, we still talked about it. We went through every possible explanation we could think of: experimental military tech, some kind of natural phenomenon we'd never heard of, even aliens. Nothing fit what we'd seen. A few weeks later, I worked up the courage to tell my friend Jacob about it. He was into sci-fi and that kind of stuff, so I thought he might at least find it interesting. Instead, he just rolled his eyes and said, "Dude, you probably saw headlights from another car reflecting weird in the trees." "There was no other car," I insisted, "and it moved through the forest, not on the road." Jacob just shrugged. "Whatever, man." After that, I stopped telling people. It wasn't worth the skeptical looks or dismissive comments, but I never stopped thinking about it. Years passed. I went to college, moved to the city for work, started building my own life. Dad stayed in Pinewood, still living in the same house, still driving the same roads. Every time I visited him, we'd inevitably find ourselves driving down that stretch of Pinewood Drive, and a silence would fall between us as we passed the spot. Sometimes, when I'm home visiting and Dad and I have had a couple of beers, one of us will bring it up. "Remember that night?" And the other will nod, and we'll talk about it again, going over the details we've recounted dozens of times, as if repetition might somehow make it make sense. I'm 29 now. I've traveled, I've read, I've learned about the world. I understand more about physics and natural phenomena than I did as a kid. I've seen ball lightning videos, read about bizarre optical illusions, learned about rare atmospheric conditions. I've considered every rational explanation I can find. None of them fit what we saw that night. What haunts me most isn't just the unexplainable nature of the light itself, but the deliberate way it moved, the way it tracked that deer with such precision and purpose. It wasn't random. It wasn't just drifting. It was hunting. Sometimes I wonder if we were meant to see it at all, or if we just happened to be in the right place at the wrong time, witnessing something we weren't supposed to see, something that normally stays hidden in the depths of the forest, away from human eyes. I still drive through those woods when I visit Dad. Sometimes, especially on dark nights when I'm alone, I find myself scanning the trees, half expecting to see that brilliant light weaving between the trunks. Part of me is terrified at the thought of seeing it again. Another part desperately wants to, as if a second encounter might somehow provide the answers the first one didn't. Whatever it was, natural phenomenon, unknown technology, or something else entirely, that 30-second encounter changed me. It opened a door in my mind that can't be closed, a persistent question mark that hovers in the background of my life. I know what I saw, Dad knows what he saw, and whatever it was real. That softball-sized ball of intense light, moving with impossible precision through the dense forest, chasing that terrified deer. It wasn't of our world, at least not the world as I understood it then, or understand it now, and sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself wondering, if it wasn't of our world, then where did it come from? And more unsettling still, what else might be out there in the darkness, just beyond the reach of our headlights? Story 10. For context, I'm 25, never been the superstitious type. I've always been the rational one in my family, the atheist who rolls his eyes whenever my mum talks about energies, or my cousin claims her apartment is haunted. I've always believed there's a logical explanation for everything. Until now. My grandmother lives in this old house in Pinecrest Valley. You know, one of those places where everyone knows everyone and the houses have been around since forever. She's been asking me to visit for months, so last Friday I finally made the trip with my girlfriend Sophia. We arrived in the afternoon, had dinner with Grandma, and since her guest room was being renovated, we were going to sleep in the basement where she has a pull-out couch. The basement itself isn't particularly creepy, just your typical unfinished basement with concrete walls, some old furniture, and boxes of Christmas decorations. It's actually pretty spacious. Grandma had set up the pull-out bed with fresh sheets and extra blankets because it gets cold down there. After spending the evening catching up, watching some TV, and having a couple beers, we headed down to the basement around 11. Sophia fell asleep almost immediately. She's always been able to do that, just close her eyes and drift off within minutes. I was scrolling through my phone for maybe half an hour before I started feeling tired too. I put my phone down, turned off the lamp, and settled in. The basement was completely dark. I mean, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, kind of dark. I could hear Sophia's soft, rhythmic breathing beside me and the occasional creaking of the old house. Here's where things get, I don't even know what to call it, unexplainable, terrifying. I was lying there, not quite asleep, but definitely relaxed, when this strange wave of comfort washed over me. Not just normal comfort, but this overwhelming sensation like I was floating in perfect warmth. It's hard to describe, but imagine the most peaceful you've ever felt and multiply it by 100. My whole body felt heavy in a pleasant way, like sinking into the softest mattress ever made. At first, I thought I was just falling asleep, but I was completely conscious. I could still hear Sophia breathing, could feel the scratchy texture of Grandma's old blanket on my skin, but this feeling of euphoria just kept intensifying. Then came the humming. It started as this low-frequency buzz in my left ear. Not loud, but persistent, kind of like when you're near power lines, but more deliberate. It had a pattern to it that wasn't random. The pitch would fluctuate slightly, almost like it was communicating something. I remember thinking, this is weird, but it feels so good I don't care. That thought alone should have alarmed me because it wasn't like me at all, but in that moment I was so blissed out that nothing seemed concerning. Then the visuals started, and that's when things got truly bizarre. My eyes were open, staring into the pitch-black basement, when suddenly I could see other rooms. Not like I was physically in them, but like they were being projected onto the darkness in front of me. First, I could see Grandma's kitchen, the yellow wallpaper, the old wooden cabinets, the clock on the wall that's been there since I was a kid, but it wasn't quite right. The colors were muted, like I was looking through a dirty window. The image shifted, and I was looking at the living room. The same faded quality, but perfectly detailed. I could see the doilies on the armrests of her rocking chair, the collection of porcelain birds on the shelf. And that's when I noticed it. In each room there was a figure, not fully formed, more like a pale, fuzzy silhouette standing perfectly still. In the kitchen, it was by the sink. In the living room, near the window, they weren't moving, just existing. I wasn't scared yet. That's the weirdest part. I was still wrapped in that cocoon of unnatural comfort, observing these visions with detached curiosity. The humming in my ear intensified, becoming more complex, almost like a language I almost understood. The images kept changing. Her bathroom, the hallway, the front porch, and in every scene was one of those fuzzy figures, always in different positions but never moving. Then the view shifted to Grandma's bedroom, and I could see her sleeping form under the covers, and at the foot of her bed stood one of those silhouettes, but this one was different. It seemed more substantial, more focused, and it was slowly turning its head toward me, as if it knew I was watching. That's when everything changed. The comfort vanished instantly, replaced by the most intense terror I've ever experienced. The humming became a harsh, painful screech. I tried to move, to scream, to wake Sophia, but I couldn't. My entire body was locked in place. I've had sleep paralysis before, twice in college during finals week, but this was completely different. With sleep paralysis, I always felt like I was struggling against something holding me down. This was like my body had simply forgotten how to move, like the connection between my brain and muscles had been severed. And then came the pressure. It started as a slight discomfort, like someone pressing their palm against my forehead. Within seconds, it transformed into this crushing sensation inside my skull, like my brain was being compressed from all sides. The pain was excruciating. I remember thinking I was having an aneurysm or a stroke. The room was still pitch black, but those visions continued, now rapidly cycling through each room of the house, the silhouettes multiplying, some now seeming to be aware of me, turning toward me, reaching out, and all the while, that pressure in my head kept building, as if something was trying to squeeze itself into my brain. I don't know how long this lasted. It could have been minutes or hours, but suddenly it stopped. Just stopped. The pressure released, the visions disappeared, and the humming cut off mid-cycle. I could move again, and the first thing I did was gasp for air, realizing I'd been holding my breath. My entire body was trembling uncontrollably, not like shivering from cold, but violent tremors that I couldn't control. I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I reached over and shook Sophia awake, probably more roughly than I intended. She startled awake, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't explain. I literally couldn't form the words to describe what had just happened. All I could say was, "We need to go upstairs, now. Please." She must have seen the terror on my face because she didn't argue. We grabbed our pillows and went up to the living room, where I made up some excuse about the basement being too cold. I spent the rest of the night on the couch while Sophia took the recliner, and I didn't sleep a single minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the beginning of that humming again, and my eyes would snap open in panic. The next morning, I felt physically ill. I had this persistent headache, not like the crushing pressure from the night before, but a dull, throbbing reminder. My body felt weak, like I'd run a marathon. Sophia kept asking if I was coming down with something, and I just nodded because it was easier than trying to explain. We left earlier than planned, making up an excuse about work, and I haven't been back since. I've tried researching what happened, looking into sleep disorders, hallucinations, even paranormal experiences, but nothing quite matches what I experienced. The most disturbing part is that it's happened twice more since then, though not as intensely. Once in my apartment and once while staying at Sophia's place. It always starts the same way. That unnatural comfort, the humming, the visions. But I've gotten better at fighting it off before it progresses to the paralysis and pressure. I haven't told anyone except you all. What would I even say? Hey, I think something is trying to get inside my head while I sleep. I sound insane just typing it out. The rational part of me wants to believe it was some strange neurological event, maybe a complex migraine or some bizarre form of seizure. But that doesn't explain why it's continuing to happen, or why I can sometimes feel that humming starting when I'm completely awake, especially when I'm alone. I've started sleeping with lights on, music playing, anything to create an environment different from that pitch-black basement. It seems to help somewhat. But I'm terrified of what might happen if I ever experience the full intensity of it again. The feeling of my brain being crushed was so real, so physical, that I'm afraid next time it might not stop. I don't know what to do. I've considered seeing a doctor, but what would I tell them? I've thought about contacting my grandmother to ask if anyone else has experienced something similar in her house, but I don't want to worry her. The worst part is the lingering doubt. Was it real? Did I actually see those rooms, those figures? Or was it all just in my head? The logical part of me says it must have been some kind of hallucination. But then, why did it feel so different from any dream or nightmare I've ever had? Why could I still sense Sophia beside me, feel the blanket, hear the house settling? I keep going back to those silhouettes, especially the one in my grandmother's room that seemed to notice me. What were they? What did they want? And most importantly, why do I sometimes feel like they're still watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down again? If anyone has experienced something similar or has any insight, please let me know. I'm desperate for answers because I can't keep living like this, afraid to sleep, constantly on edge, wondering if my mind is breaking down or if something truly unexplainable is happening to me. Story 11. I've been trying to make sense of what happened to me for months now. I need to get this out there because I'm starting to think I'm going crazy. I've always worked the late shift at Doreen's Diner off the interstate, and the drive home never bothered me before. In fact, I used to love it. The emptiness, the quiet. It was my time to decompress after dealing with truckers and drunks all night. That night started like any other. I clocked out around 12:30 in the morning after an 8-hour shift of slinging coffee and burgers. My feet were killing me, but I wasn't tired. I've always been a night owl. Something about the darkness just feels comfortable to me, or at least it did. My old Chevy, this beat-up blue Impala I inherited from my dad, was the only car left in the parking lot. I remember tossing my bag onto the passenger seat and cranking the engine 3 times before it finally turned over. I should have taken that as the first sign something was off, but I just figured it was the cold. It was early November, and the mountain air in the Appalachian foothills gets that bite to it. I didn't head straight home that night. Sometimes after a particularly rough shift, I like to take the scenic route down Route 17. It's this forgotten stretch of highway that runs parallel to the interstate, winding through hills and abandoned little pockets of what used to be thriving stops before the main highway diverted all the traffic. There's something peaceful about those old shuttered motels and rusted-out gas stations. They tell stories, you know. The radio was acting up, more static than music, but I didn't mind. I rolled down the windows despite the chill, letting the night air clear my head. The trees on either side of the road were bare, their branches reaching up like skeletal fingers against the sky. There was no moon that night. I remember that clearly because the darkness felt absolute except for my headlights carving a tunnel through it. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes when I first noticed something felt wrong. The air in the car suddenly felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. At first, I thought I was just tired, but this was different. Have you ever had that feeling when you walk into a room and immediately know something's not right? It was like that, but in my own car. A space that had always felt safe. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 1:15 in the morning. The radio was getting worse, so I switched it off, and that's when I realized how quiet it was. Not the normal peaceful quiet of night driving, but a smothering silence that made my ears ring. I rolled the window down further, but it didn't help. The air outside felt just as thick. I was approaching mile marker 43 when everything changed. I remember the number because it's painted on this big rock by the side of the road. Locals call it Widow's Peak because the formation looks like a woman's face in profile if you catch it in the right light. That's when I saw him. A man was standing on the shoulder, completely motionless, just standing there at 1:15 in the morning on a deserted back road. My first instinct was to slow down. Maybe he needed help, car trouble or something. But as my headlights illuminated him better, I felt my stomach drop. He was wearing what looked like an old, tattered coat that hung too loose on his frame. His arms just hung at his sides, not moving at all, not even slightly swaying like a normal person would. And his face, I couldn't see his face clearly. It was like the shadows were clinging to it, even with my headlights pointed right at him. I slowed down even more, some stupid part of my brain still thinking maybe he needed help. But when I got closer, he didn't wave or make any gesture. He just stood there. And then, as I passed him, he turned his head, just his head, and looked directly at me through the windshield. I can't explain what I saw in those eyes. They weren't right. They weren't human eyes. They were too dark, too empty, and yet somehow aware in a way that sent ice straight through my veins. It wasn't like making eye contact with a person. It was like something was looking at me through a person-shaped hole in reality. I hit the gas hard, the Impala's engine groaning in protest as I sped away. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see him in the road behind me, but there was nothing but darkness. I tried to calm myself down. I told myself he was just some weird drifter, or maybe I was more tired than I thought and my mind was playing tricks. The clock read 1:25 now. I'd been driving for about 10 minutes since seeing the man, and I was starting to breathe normally again when I saw her. A woman was standing directly in the middle of the road, about 50 yards ahead of me. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the damp asphalt. The Chevy shuddered to a stop about 20 feet from where she stood. Like the man, she was completely motionless. Her clothes, what looked like a dress or maybe a nightgown, were torn and hanging oddly from her thin frame. Her hair was long and matted with what looked like dirt or mud, but it was her face that made my blood run cold. She was staring directly at me, her eyes wide and unblinking, her mouth open in what looked like a silent scream, but she wasn't making any sound. She wasn't moving at all. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. I couldn't move. My hands were frozen to the steering wheel. Then, without warning, she was gone. Not like she ran away or stepped aside. She was just gone. 1 second she was there. The next, there was nothing but empty road in my headlights. I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until my lungs started burning. I gasped, sucking in air that felt too thin. The digital clock on my dashboard read 1:27. Only 2 minutes had passed since I'd seen her. I should have turned around. I should have gone back to the main road. But something kept me driving forward. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was the irrational fear that if I turned back, I'd encounter that man again. So I kept going, pressing the gas pedal harder than necessary, watching the speedometer climb to 60, 70 miles per hour on a road that shouldn't be taken faster than 40. That's when the fog rolled in. It wasn't natural. It came too fast, too thick. 1 minute the road was clear, and the next I was driving through what looked like a solid wall of white. My headlights reflected back at me, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I slowed down, having no choice unless I wanted to drive off the road entirely. Then I saw the lights, not headlights or streetlights, but strange orb-like balls of light that seemed to float through the fog around my car. They were bluish-white, about the size of basketballs, and they moved in these weirdly hypnotic patterns. They'd drift alongside the car for a while, then dart ahead, then circle back. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them, and they seemed to be, I don't know, escorting me, herding me. I couldn't tell if they were trying to guide me somewhere or trap me. I checked the clock again, 2:15. Somehow nearly an hour had passed, but that couldn't be right. Route 17 isn't that long. I should have reached the turnoff to my neighborhood by now, but the road just kept stretching on, and the fog kept getting thicker, and those lights kept dancing around my car. Every time I checked my rearview mirror, I'd catch glimpses of figures standing by the roadside. Sometimes it was the man in the coat, sometimes it was the woman, sometimes it was both of them, sometimes it was shapes I couldn't quite make out, but they were always watching me. Always standing perfectly still, except for their heads, which would turn in perfect unison to follow my car as I passed. Time stopped making sense. The dashboard clock would jump forward in weird increments. 2:15, 2:47, 3:22. The fog never lifted. The orbs never left. And I just kept driving, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, too terrified to stop, but increasingly certain I wasn't making any progress. I tried the radio again, desperate for some connection to the normal world. Static hissed from the speakers, but beneath it, I swear I could hear voices, whispers that were almost words, but not quite. I shut it off quickly, after what felt like hours. The clock now reading 4:05, I finally saw an exit sign looming out of the fog. I'd never been so happy to see a sign in my life. I took the exit, tires squealing as I turned too sharply, half expecting the road to disappear or lead me back to the same endless stretch. But it didn't. The fog began to thin almost immediately, and within minutes, I was on a road I recognized, just a few miles from my apartment. As I pulled into my parking spot, the sky was just starting to lighten with dawn. I sat in my car for a long time, unable to make myself get out. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those figures standing in the lot behind me. When I finally did get out, my legs were so shaky, I almost fell. I've tried to make sense of what happened that night. I've driven other roads at night since then, and nothing strange has occurred. but I haven't been back on Route 17. I take the interstate home now, even though it adds 20 minutes to my commute. Sometimes co-workers ask why I changed my route, and I make up excuses about construction or traffic. The thing that scares me most is that I drive past the turnoff for Route 17 every night, and I swear, every single time, I feel something pulling me toward that exit. Like whatever's out there is waiting for me to come back. Like our encounter isn't finished. I've tried researching the history of Route 17, looking for accidents or strange occurrences. There are a few forum posts from other drivers who've experienced weird things, unexplained fog, lost time, strange lights, but nothing like what I saw. Sometimes I wonder if I hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe I was more exhausted than I realized. Maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and dreamed it all. But then I remember those eyes, those wrong, empty eyes, and I know it was real. I still work the night shift at the diner. I still drive home in the dark, but something changed in me that night. I used to find comfort in the darkness. Now I sleep with the lights on. Story 12. I still can't explain what happened to us at the Amber Ridge Inn. It's been 3 months and I find myself checking the locks twice every night. Jessica won't even talk about it anymore. I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. My girlfriend and I were driving back from her parents' place last January. We'd taken a long weekend to visit them in Millbrook, about 4 hours from our apartment. The trip there had been fine, clear skies, good roads, but coming back, that's when everything went wrong. We left around 2 in the afternoon. Should have been plenty of time to get home before dark, but about an hour into the drive, we hit this wall of fog. Not your normal, patchy stuff. This was thick, like driving through milk. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet at best. "Babe, maybe we should pull over and wait it out," Jessica said, leaning forward in her seat like that would somehow help her see better through the windshield. I shook my head. The weather app says it's like this for miles, could be hours before it clears. So we kept going, crawling along at maybe 30 miles per hour. The GPS was our lifeline at that point. We were somewhere in the hills near Amber Ridge, a small town I'd never even heard of before that day. Then came the detour. A road closed sign appeared out of nowhere, forcing us to turn onto some unmarked road. The GPS recalculated, telling us this new route would add 40 minutes to our trip. Great. "Are you sure this is right?" Jessica asked, squinting at my phone. "This doesn't look like a main road." She wasn't wrong. The road had narrowed, the asphalt crumbling at the edges. Trees pressed in from both sides, their branches scraping against the car like fingers. The fog had somehow gotten even thicker, swirling around our headlights in a way that made my eyes hurt if I looked at it too long. Then the GPS glitched. The blue line we were following disappeared, replaced by the dreaded recalculating message. When it came back, we were apparently in the middle of nowhere. No road shown on the map at all. "Fuck," I muttered, tapping the screen. "Can you get a signal on your phone?" Jessica checked. No, nothing. By this point, it was getting dark. Not just fog dark, but actually sunset dark, the combination making it nearly impossible to see. I slowed to 15 miles per hour, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. "Ben, I think we should stop," Jessica said, her voice tight with worry. "We're going to hit something." I was about to argue when my headlights caught a weathered wooden sign on the right side of the road. It was tilted, half the letters faded, but I could make out Amber Ridge Inn and an arrow pointing down a gravel driveway. "Look," I said, nodding toward it. "Maybe they have rooms, or at least someone who can give us directions." Jessica didn't look convinced, but she didn't object when I turned onto the driveway. It wound through dense trees for about a quarter mile before opening up to reveal what I guess you'd call the inn. It was a 2-story Victorian-style house, but calling it rundown would be generous. Paint peeled from the siding in long strips. Several windows were boarded up. The front porch sagged in the middle like it might collapse at any moment. Ben, this place is abandoned, Jessica said, stating the obvious. We can't stay here. I know that, I replied, frustration creeping into my voice. But we can at least turn around in the driveway and try to find our way back to the main road. I pulled up in front of the house and killed the engine, planning to check the map again before turning around. That's when I noticed how utterly silent it was. No wind, no distant traffic, not even insects. Just stillness and fog that seemed to press against the car windows like something solid. Let's just sleep in the car tonight, Jessica suggested, after we spent 20 minutes trying to find our location on the map. We can figure this out in the morning when the fog lifts. I wasn't thrilled about spending the night cramped in my Honda Civic, but she was right. Driving any further in these conditions was asking for trouble. So we reclined our seats as far as they would go, used our jackets as blankets and tried to get comfortable. I must have dozed off because I jerked awake to the sound of tapping on my window. 3 quick taps like someone flicking a fingernail against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, heart pounding. The fog pressed against the windows, thicker than ever, glowing faintly in the moonlight. I couldn't see more than a foot beyond the glass. Did you hear that? I whispered to Jessica, who was still asleep. Tap, tap, tap. This time on her window. She jolted awake with a gasp. What was that? I don't know, I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. Probably just a branch or something. But there were no trees close enough to touch the car, and the tapping had been too deliberate, too rhythmic. Tap, 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 the rear window. Now, Jessica grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Ben, there's something out there. I squinted through the fog, trying to make out shapes. For a second I thought I saw nothing. Then a shadow moved. Not a tree or animal, but something tall and thin, gliding through the mist. It disappeared as quickly as I spotted it. Did you see that? I hissed, pointing. Jessica nodded, her face pale in the dim light. What is it? Before I could answer, the tapping came again, harder this time, on all windows at once. Then it changed. No longer the gentle tap of a fingernail, but the scrape of something sharp being dragged across glass. Scritch, scritch. Jessica screamed, and I fumbled for the keys, still in the ignition. I twisted them, expecting the engine to roar to life. Click. Nothing. I tried again. Click. The dashboard lights flickered once, then went dark. What's wrong with it? Jessica asked, her voice rising in panic. I don't know. It was fine earlier. I tried again and again, but the engine wouldn't catch, not even a sputter. The scraping grew louder, more insistent. I looked out my window and nearly vomited. A face was pressed against the glass, or something like a face. It was gaunt, with hollow eyes and a grotesque smile that revealed sharp, rotting teeth. Its skin was gray and papery, stretched too tight over its skull, and it was staring right at me. I recoiled, slamming into Jessica. We need to get out of here. And go where? She cried, looking around wildly. The house. It was our only option. Even abandoned, it had to be safer than being trapped in the car with that thing circling us. On the count of 3, I said, gripping the door handle, we run for the house. 1, 2, 3. We burst out of the car, the cold, damp air hitting my lungs like a punch. The fog swirled around us, so thick I could barely see Jessica, even though she was right beside me. I grabbed her hand and we sprinted toward the dark shape of the house. Behind us, I heard movement. Not footsteps, but a strange sliding sound, like something being dragged across gravel. I didn't look back. We reached the porch, the old boards creaking under our weight. The front door was locked, of course. I threw my shoulder against it once, twice, feeling the wood splinter on the third try. We tumbled inside, slamming the door behind us. The interior was dark and smelled of rot and something else, something sickly sweet that made my stomach turn. Jessica fumbled with her phone, turning on the flashlight. Its beam cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture draped in sheets. We need to block the door, I gasped, dragging a heavy side table across the floor. Jessica helped me push it against the entrance, followed by a moth-eaten armchair. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the front window now. the glass rattling in its frame. "Upstairs," I whispered, pointing to a staircase at the far end of the hallway. "We need to find a room we can barricade ourselves in." We crept through the house, Jessica's phone light casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Every floorboard seemed to creak beneath our feet, each sound amplified in the silent house. The stairs protested loudly as we climbed them, and I winced at every step, certain the noise would draw whatever was outside. The upstairs hallway stretched before us, doors lining both sides. Most were closed, one hanging off its hinges. We chose the second door on the right, slipping inside what appeared to be a bedroom. There was an old iron bed frame, a dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. The window itself was cracked but intact. "Help me move the dresser," I whispered, and together we shoved it against the door. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jessica collapsed onto the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. "What is happening, Ben? What was that thing outside the car?" I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it." We sat in silence for a few minutes, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. Nothing. Maybe we'd imagined it all. Maybe the fog had played tricks on our eyes, and the tapping had been some animal. But then I noticed something odd. The room was getting foggy, not like smoke from a fire, but the same thick white fog from outside. It was seeping in through the cracked window, curling along the floor like a living thing. "Jessica," I whispered, pointing. She saw it too, her eyes widening in horror. We scrambled to our feet, backing away from the window. "We need to leave this room," she said, her voice trembling. But before we could move the dresser, we heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps that didn't sound quite right, like someone walking with legs that bent the wrong way. They stopped right outside our door. Tap, tap, tap. This time on the door itself. Jessica clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. I pulled her close, both of us pressing against the wall furthest from the door. The fog continued to pour in, now ankle-deep and rising. The doorknob rattled, the dresser shifted slightly, scraping against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. Now, from the window behind us. I turned, already knowing what I'd see. The face was there, pressed against the glass, its grotesque smile wider than before. But now I could see more of it. The impossibly long, thin body, the arms that hung to its knees, ending in fingers like talons. It moved strangely, almost shimmering, as if it wasn't entirely real. I'm not ashamed to admit I pissed myself then. The warm wetness spread down my leg as I stood frozen, unable to look away from those hollow eyes. The dresser slid another inch. The door began to open. The fog was at our knees now, thick and cold, with a strange weight to it. It seemed to pull at us like quicksand. "Ben," Jessica whispered, her voice so faint I barely heard it. "I can't move my legs." I tried to step toward her and found I couldn't lift my feet. The fog had us. The face at the window grinned wider, impossibly wide, its jaw unhinging like a snake's. Then it vanished, only to reappear a moment later, tapping at a different pane of glass. The door opened another inch. Through the crack I could see another of those faces, this one with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The tapping at the window grew more insistent, the scraping sound returning. The glass began to crack further, spiderwebbing outward from the center. The last thing I remember clearly is Jessica's scream as the window shattered and the fog rushed in like a tidal wave. I remember hands, cold, impossibly strong hands, grabbing at my clothes, my hair, my skin. I remember being dragged toward the window, toward that grinning face with its rotting teeth. Then, nothing, a blank space in my memory. I woke up in our car, parked on the side of a main road. Jessica was beside me, still unconscious. It was morning, the fog gone, sun shining. According to my phone, we'd lost nearly 12 hours. Jessica had scratches on her arms and face. I had bruises shaped like fingerprints on my wrists and throat. Neither of us remembered how we got back to the car or onto the main road. We drove straight to the nearest police station. The officers were sympathetic but skeptical. They sent a patrol car to check out the coordinates where we thought the inn had been. They found nothing. No abandoned house, no inn, not even a driveway turning off the main road. We've tried to move on, to forget what happened, but sometimes on foggy nights I hear it, that soft, insistent tapping on the window. And I know they found us. I know they followed us home. And I know that someday the fog will come again, and with it, those hollow-eyed figures with their terrible grins. And next time, we won't escape the Amber Ridge Inn. Story 13. I'm still shaking as I type this. I need to get this off my chest because I haven't been able to sleep properly since it happened 3 nights ago. I've always considered myself a rational person, but what happened that night in my home has completely shattered my understanding of reality. I live in a mobile home park in Palmdale with my mum, stepdad, and younger sister. It's not the fanciest place, but it's home. The park is usually pretty quiet after 10 at night, with just the occasional dog barking or someone coming home late from work. Ever since I was a teenager, I've had this habit of checking the doors and windows before bed. My stepdad used to call me paranoid, but I just can't sleep unless I know everything is locked up tight. Living in a mobile home, you're already more vulnerable than in a regular house. Thinner walls, easier entry points. So yeah, I do my rounds every night without fail. This past Monday night started like any other. Everyone had gone to bed around 11. Mom and my stepdad were in their room at the far end of the home, and my sister was in her room with her door shut as usual, probably still on her phone, even though she had school the next day. I was just about to start my nightly check when I got this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and immediately sense something's off? It was like that, but throughout the entire home, the air felt different, heavier somehow, and much colder than usual. We live in the desert, so even our nights don't get that cold, especially inside. But I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of my face. I rubbed my arms, thinking maybe the AC was malfunctioning again. But it wasn't just the temperature, the sounds were wrong too, or rather, the lack of sounds. Usually, even at midnight, you can hear the distant hum of the highway, the occasional car passing through the park, maybe someone's TV through the thin walls. But that night, nothing. Absolute silence. Like someone had thrown a thick blanket over our entire home, muffling everything. I told myself I was being stupid, probably just tired from working overtime at the warehouse. But the feeling wouldn't go away, so I decided to do my usual check, hoping the familiar routine would calm me down. I started in my bedroom, checking the window was locked and the blinds were closed. All normal. Then I moved toward the kitchen, and that's when things got even weirder. The cold intensified with each step I took. By the time I reached the kitchen, I was shivering uncontrollably. It had to be at least 40 degrees in there, maybe colder. I checked the back door, locked. Windows, locked. I moved to the dining area, my socks sliding on the linoleum floor. The cold was making the floor feel like ice beneath my feet. I could hear the heater running, but it was like it was having no effect at all. I peeked into my sister's room. She was sound asleep, bundled under her blankets. Mom and stepdad's door was closed, and I could hear my stepdad's familiar snoring. Everything seemed normal except for this bone-deep cold and the unnatural silence. As I headed toward the living room, something changed. The air shifted. One moment I was freezing, and the next, it was like walking into a sauna. The temperature must have jumped 30 degrees in the span of a few feet. Sweat immediately broke out across my forehead and back. My t-shirt stuck to my skin. But it wasn't just heat. There was this pressure, like the air itself was pushing against me from all sides. It reminded me of when you're driving through the mountains and your ears pop from the change in elevation. Except this pressure wasn't just in my ears. It was everywhere, pushing against my skin, making it hard to breathe. With each step I took toward the front of the house, the pressure and heat intensified. My heart started racing, and I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. That was the only sound, just the blood rushing through my veins. Our living room leads to a short hallway with the front door at the end. As I approached that hallway, the pressure became almost unbearable. My skin felt tight, like it was shrinking around my bones. The heat was suffocating. I wanted to turn back, to retreat to my room, but something kept pulling me forward. It wasn't curiosity. It was more like compulsion, like I had to keep moving toward that door. I remember thinking how weird it was that I felt simultaneously dragged toward the door and terrified of reaching it. When I got to the hallway, I had to brace myself against the wall. The pressure was making me dizzy, and the heat had me drenched in sweat. The short hallway to our front door seemed to stretch on forever, like one of those nightmare scenarios where you keep walking but never reach your destination. But I did reach it. I got to our front door, just a standard aluminum door with a small window at eye level. The porch light was off, which was strange because we always leave it on at night. Through the window, I could see nothing but pitch blackness, as if the glass was looking out into a void rather than our front yard. The doorknob seemed to vibrate slightly beneath my hand when I touched it, and that's when the emotions hit me, emotions that weren't mine. Rage, hatred, malice. These feelings flooded into me the moment my skin made contact with that metal knob. It was like touching a live wire, but instead of electricity, it was pure, concentrated hatred flowing into my body. I jerked my hand back, but the feelings lingered. I stood there, trembling, as understanding dawned on me. Something was out there, something wanted in. And it wasn't human. I've never been particularly religious or spiritual. I don't have crystals or sage or anything like that. But in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that there was something malevolent on the other side of that door, and it was trying to trick me into letting it in. The pressure around me increased until my ears were popping. The heat became almost unbearable, and there was this voice. Not a physical voice I could hear with my ears, but more like a thought being inserted directly into my brain. Open the door, just check outside, make sure everything is safe. It was trying to use my own paranoia against me, trying to convince me that my security check wouldn't be complete unless I opened that door. I don't know where I found the strength or the clarity, but something inside me snapped into focus. I took a step back from the door and spoke out loud, my voice steady despite my terror. I don't know who you are, but you are not welcome in this home. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The pressure vanished so suddenly that I staggered backward. The oppressive heat dissipated like someone had thrown open all the windows, replaced by the normal, slightly cool air of our home. And the sounds, the distant highway, someone's TV, a dog barking a few lots over, all came rushing back as if someone had hit the unmute button on the world. I stood there for several minutes, just breathing and listening to the blessed, ordinary sounds of nighttime in our mobile home park. My clothes were soaked with sweat, my legs shaking so badly I had to slide down the wall to sit on the floor. I don't know how long I sat there in the hallway. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. I was afraid to move, afraid that whatever had been outside might still be lingering, waiting for another opportunity. Eventually, I gathered enough courage to peek through the window in the door. Our front yard looked completely normal. The porch light was on. Had it been on the whole time? I could see our car parked where it always was, the neighbor's wind chimes moving gently in the breeze. Everything looked exactly as it should, but I knew what I had felt, what I had experienced. That wasn't my imagination or some weird anxiety attack. Something had been there trying to get in, and somehow, by firmly rejecting it, I had sent it away. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of our mobile home settling. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but relieved. In the daylight, it was easier to question what had happened. Maybe I had just had some weird episode. Maybe the stress of work and bills and everything else had finally gotten to me. But deep down, I know that's not true. Whatever was outside our door that night was real. It was malevolent, and it wanted in. I haven't told my family about what happened. What would I even say? Hey, by the way, I think I prevented some kind of evil entity from entering our home last night. They'd think I was losing it. It's been 3 nights now, and I still do my security checks, but I'm quicker about it, and I never linger by the front door. Sometimes I think I feel the air getting a little heavier, a little colder, but nothing like that night. I don't know what that thing was. A demon? A ghost? Some kind of energy I don't have a name for? All I know is that it was real, it was evil, and for whatever reason, it couldn't enter without being invited or tricking someone into opening the door. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? I can't be the only one. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had opened that door. What would have come in? What would it have done to me, to my family? I don't have any answers, just questions, and this lingering fear that it might come back. That next time, I might not be strong enough to send it away. Story. I've never really talked about this with anyone outside my family. It's been over 20 years now, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was 9 years old when it happened. My brothers were just little kids. Tommy was 5 and Michael was 4. We were staying with our stepdad, Rick, while Mom was working the night shift at the hospital. She was a nurse and often had to work those awful 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shifts. We lived in this old 2-story house on the edge of town, the kind with wooden floors that creaked with every step and those narrow, steep staircases that make noise even when nobody's on them. At least that's what I told myself on normal nights. Our bedrooms were in the basement, which I always hated. It was partially finished, carpeted and everything, but it still felt like a basement with its low ceiling and small windows near the top of the walls. That particular night, it was a Thursday in October, had already been really hard. We'd gotten the call that morning that our great-grandmother had passed away. Mom was pretty upset but still had to go to work because they were short-staffed. She told us great-grandma Helen had died peacefully in her sleep at the nursing home. I remember Mom hugging us all before she left for work, telling us that great-grandma was in a better place now. I didn't really know how to feel. Great-grandma Helen wasn't exactly the warm, cookie-baking type of grandmother you see on TV. She was stern and didn't smile much. She would pinch our cheeks too hard and criticize everything from our clothes to the way we sat at the table. Mom always said, "That's just how she shows love," but even as a kid I wasn't so sure. Anyway, bedtime rolled around at 9 o'clock and Rick was trying to get us downstairs to bed. We were all being extra difficult that night. Maybe it was because of great-grandma dying, or maybe it was just that the house felt different. Colder, somehow. "I don't want to sleep downstairs," Tommy whined, clutching his stuffed dinosaur to his chest. "It's scary down there." "There's nothing to be scared of," Rick said, but I could tell he was getting frustrated. He wasn't our real dad, and sometimes he didn't know how to handle us when we got like this. "Can't we sleep up here tonight?" I asked, already in my pink pajamas with the little hearts on them. "Please, just for tonight." Rick sighed. "Your mom wants you guys in your own beds. Come on, I'll leave the basement door open and the hallway light on." Michael started crying then, and I remember feeling this weird sense that something was wrong. Not just normal kid afraid of the dark wrong, but something deeper. I felt like we needed to stay upstairs. That's when we heard it, the first footstep. It came from the bottom of the staircase leading from the first floor to the second floor, the main staircase in the center of the house, a distinct, heavy step on the first stair, then silence. Rick froze mid-sentence. We all looked at each other. "What was that?" I whispered. "Probably just the house settling," Rick said, but his voice sounded different. Tight. Another step, slow and deliberate. Then another. Someone was climbing the stairs. Rick's face changed in a way I'll never forget. All the color drained out, and his eyes got wide. That's when I knew for sure this wasn't normal. This wasn't just a house noise. Adults aren't supposed to get scared of house noises. "Kids, come here," he said quietly, gathering us close to him in the living room, as far from the staircase as we could get. The footsteps continued. Slow, methodical. Each one spaced apart, like someone taking their time. Someone who had difficulty climbing stairs. "Is someone in the house?" Tommy whispered. his little hands gripping my pajama top so hard I could feel his fingernails through the fabric. "Shh," Rick said, reaching for the cordless phone. His hand was shaking. That's when we heard the railing creak. It was the sound of weight shifting, of someone leaning heavily on the old wooden banister, exactly the way Great-Grandma Helen used to climb stairs, one step at a time, leaning on the railing between each step because of her bad hip. I remember thinking with absolute clarity, that's Great-Grandma coming up the stairs. The footsteps paused halfway up. There were 14 steps total. I'd counted them 1,000,000 times, and the sound stopped at the 7th step, right at the little landing where the stairs made a turn. In the silence that followed, I could hear everyone breathing. Rick was holding the phone but hadn't dialed yet. Michael had his face buried against Rick's shoulder, sobbing quietly. Tommy was pressed against me, trembling, and I was frozen, staring at the doorway that led to the staircase, expecting to see Great-Grandma Helen appear at any moment. Then the screen doors started. We had these old aluminum screen doors on both the front and back entrances of the house. They made a very distinctive sound when they opened, a metallic squeak, and an even more distinctive sound when they slammed shut. Bang! First the front door, squeak, bang, then the back door, squeak, bang. Back and forth, opening and slamming shut, over and over. Rick jumped up, still holding Michael. "Stay here," he ordered, but none of us would have moved anyway. He went to the front door first, then the back, checking both. I could see him from where I sat, frozen on the couch. "The doors are locked," he said when he came back, his voice shaking. "They're not moving, they're not open." But we could all still hear them. Squeak, bang, like someone was walking in and out of the house, slamming the doors behind them, and all the while the footsteps on the stairs had resumed their slow climb. Step, creak, step, creak. I started crying then. Not just normal crying, but that hysterical, can't catch your breath kind of crying that takes over your whole body. Tommy joined in, and Michael was already a mess. We were all huddled together on the couch, Rick standing in front of us like he was trying to protect us. But from what? How do you protect someone from something you can't see? The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I could tell because the sound changed from the hollow echo of steps on wooden stairs to the softer thud of steps on the carpeted hallway floor. And then they stopped. The screen doors stopped too. Everything went silent except for our crying. Rick finally dialed the phone. I'm not sure if he was calling the police or my mom, but before he could finish, the phone died. Just went completely dead, even though I'd seen him check that it was fully charged earlier. "It's okay," he kept saying, over and over. "It's okay, it's okay." But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. We stayed there, all huddled together on the couch, for what felt like hours. Nobody wanted to go downstairs to bed now. Nobody wanted to move at all. Rick kept trying different phones in the house, but none of them worked. His cell phone had no signal either. I remember looking at the clock on the VCR and watching the minutes tick by. 10 o'clock, 11 midnight, 1 in the morning. We must have fallen asleep eventually, all piled together on that couch, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of Mom's key in the front door at 4 in the morning. She'd gotten off work early. Rick told her everything while we sat there, still too scared to move much. I expected her not to believe us, to say it was just our imaginations or the wind or something, but she didn't. She just got really quiet and pale. "Today's the day after she died," Mom said finally. "They say that's when spirits sometimes visit." I remember being surprised that Mom would say something like that. She wasn't usually the type to talk about ghosts or spirits, but she looked really shaken. "Helen always said she'd come say goodbye," Mom added, almost to herself. We all slept in the living room that night, even Mom. Nobody mentioned going to our beds. The next day, we found out some weird things. The screen doors were both locked from the inside, with those little hook locks that you can't reach from outside. There was no wind that night. It had been completely still, and most importantly, we found out that Great-Grandma Helen had died at exactly 8:45 p.m. just 15 minutes before we heard those first footsteps on the stairs. Over the years, other things happened. My grandfather, great-grandma Helen's son, who never believed in that supernatural nonsense, admitted that he saw her standing in the corner of his bedroom that same night. He said he'd woken up at exactly 3 a.m. and there she was, just looking at him before she faded away. And my mom, a few days after that night, she woke up feeling like someone had smacked her wrist hard. There was even a red mark. Great-grandma Helen used to do that to Mom when she was a kid, smack her wrist when she did something unladylike. It's been over 20 years, but my brothers and I still talk about it sometimes. We've all moved away from that house, thankfully, but none of us has ever found a good explanation for what happened. I've looked into all the rational possibilities, wind, intruders, the house settling, but nothing explains all of it together. I guess some things just don't have explanations. All I know is that whatever happened that night, it felt like Great-Grandma Helen was making one last visit to say goodbye. And honestly, it was exactly like her to make it terrifying rather than comforting. She was never the gentle type, even at the end. Story 15. And the main part of the station is pretty old, and no one seems to know exactly when it was built. They added the truck bays and the lounge area back in the 80s, but the rest of it, ancient. When I first got assigned here, the older guys would make jokes about our ghost buddies, but I thought they were just messing with the new guy. Turns out they weren't joking at all. My first weird experience happened about 2 months after I started. I was in the kitchen grabbing a coffee when I saw something dart past the doorway out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was Martinez or maybe Johnson, so I called out, but nobody answered. When I went to check, there was nobody in the hallway or any of the nearby rooms. I brushed it off as my eyes playing tricks on me, but then it kept happening. Dark figures at the edge of my vision. Every time I'd turn to look, there'd be nothing there, but I know I saw something, and it wasn't just me. We've all seen them. The truck room is the worst. You'll be in there doing equipment checks, and suddenly you'll hear footsteps running across the concrete floor. Not like someone jogging, I mean running, like they're in a panic. The first time it happened to me, I was alone in there at around 2 in the morning during a quiet shift. The sound was so clear and loud that I jumped up and called out, thinking maybe someone had come in. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then there's the truck doors. Jesus, the truck doors. We've all seen them open and close by themselves, and I don't mean slightly. I mean fully swing open or shut when there's no breeze, no one nearby, nothing that could possibly cause it. I was doing my workout in the bay one afternoon about a year ago, and the door to engine 4 just opened up. Then it closed. Then it opened again. I stood there watching it happen 3 times before I noped the hell out of there. The object's moving, though. That's what really gets to me. About 2 years ago, we were all sitting around the table playing cards when a coffee mug slid across the counter. Not like it was on a wet spot or something. It moved a good 1.5 feet. 6 of us saw it. Captain Rivera actually got up and checked to see if the building was settling or if there had been a small earthquake. Nothing. The mug just moved. The voices are what creep me out the most. You'll be walking down a hallway and you'll hear whispers coming from the rooms you pass. Open the door and nobody's there. Sometimes it sounds like a conversation just out of earshot. Other times it's clearer, but still impossible to make out exactly what they're saying. One night about 3 years ago, I was in the bunk room trying to get some sleep during a 24-hour shift. It was around 3 in the morning, and everyone else was either asleep or watching TV in the lounge. Clear as day, I heard someone call my name right next to my ear. Mike? Just like that. I jumped up so fast I nearly hit my head on the bunk above me. I thought maybe one of the guys was messing with me, but everyone was accounted for, half asleep in the bunks or watching a movie in the other room. And the pool table. God, the pool table. At least once a week, usually in the middle of the night, we'll hear the sound of pool balls clacking together and rolling around. The first few times it happened, we all ran in there thinking someone was playing a late-night game. But nope. Empty room. Balls perfectly racked. It happened again last night around 3 a.m. The sound is so distinct, there's no mistaking it. Then there's the feeling of being watched. Sometimes you'll be alone in a room, and the hair on the back of your neck will stand up. You'll get this overwhelming sense that someone's standing right behind you, but when you turn around, nothing. I've felt a cold breath on the back of my neck more times than I can count. Johnson says he's felt something brush against his arm when he's alone in the supply closet. Martinez swears something tugged on his uniform shirt once while he was changing. Look, we've all talked about this stuff and we've ruled out practical jokes. These things have been happening for years, long before any of us were stationed here. The guys who've been here 20 years have the same stories we do. Plus, we're not exactly the pranking type. Not with this kind of stuff anyway. We mess with each other, sure, but not in ways that would genuinely freak someone out in the middle of the night. But I think we made things worse. God, I wish we hadn't done it. About 5 or 6 years ago, a bunch of us were working a 48-hour shift over Halloween weekend. It was unusually quiet, barely any calls. We were bored out of our minds, and someone, I think it was Davis, but I'm not going to throw him under the bus, brought out a Ouija board. Most of us thought it was stupid, but we were bored, so 6 of us went down to the basement with it around midnight. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I know. Firefighters using a Ouija board in a haunted firehouse basement on Halloween. It's like the setup for a bad horror movie. But we did it. At first, nothing happened. We were all laughing, accusing each other of moving the planchette. But then it started moving in a way that didn't feel like anyone was pushing it. It spelled out help and then fire over and over. We thought maybe one of the guys was messing around, but everyone seemed genuinely freaked out. Then the temperature in the basement dropped dramatically. I'm not exaggerating. We could see our breath all of a sudden. The lights flickered, and we heard what sounded like someone screaming from far away. We all got out of there pretty quick after that. Since that night, things have gotten worse. The activity has ramped up. More sightings, more noises, more stuff moving around, and we've had a string of weird injuries and bad luck. Peterson fell down the stairs 2 days after the Ouija board incident. Broke his ankle in 3 places. Rivera's car broke down 4 times in 1 month. Johnson developed this weird rash that doctors couldn't explain. Davis had 3 family emergencies in 2 weeks. As for me, I started having these intense nightmares where I'm trapped in a burning building, but I'm not myself. I'm someone else, looking through their eyes, feeling their panic. I always wake up right before the flames reach me. I've had the same dream at least twice a week since that night. Last week was the worst it's ever been. I was alone in the station. Everyone else was out on a call, but I'd stayed behind because I was on light duty after spraining my wrist. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I heard someone laugh right behind me. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was cold and angry. I spun around, and there was no one there, but all the cabinet doors were open, every single one. I closed them all, and as soon as I closed the last one, they all flew open again at once. It was like something out of a movie, except it was real, and I was living it. I ran out to the truck bay, and that's when I saw it. A full-bodied shadow figure standing by engine 2. Not just a glimpse or something in my peripheral vision, a solid black shape in the form of a person just standing there. It was there for maybe 5 seconds before it moved, not walked, moved across the bay and disappeared through the wall. The craziest part, when the guys got back from the call, they told me they'd been at a house fire. The address? The exact same street where our station used to be located back in the early 1900s, before they built this current building. I didn't even know that until Rivera mentioned it casually. Apparently there had been a major fire at the old station, and 3 firefighters had died. We've mostly stopped talking about the weird stuff that happens here. It's just become part of working at Station 23. Sometimes a new person will get transferred in, and they'll start noticing things, and one of us will just nod and say, "Yeah, that happens." Most of us have accepted that whatever is here with us isn't going away. I don't know if it's the spirits of those firefighters who died or something else entirely. I don't know why they're still here or what they want. All I know is that this place is definitely haunted, and using that Ouija board was probably the stupidest thing we could have done. Last night, I was in the bunk room again, trying to sleep after a busy day. It was around 2 a.m., and I heard someone whispering my name again. Mike. Mike. Help us, Mike. I kept my eyes shut tight, pretending I couldn't hear it. Then I felt the blanket slowly being pulled off me, not like it was sliding off, like someone was deliberately, slowly pulling it. I grabbed it and held on, and whatever was pulling stopped for a moment. Then I felt the mattress depress, like someone was sitting on the edge of my bed. I finally opened my eyes, and there was nothing there. But my blanket was on the floor, and the indent in the mattress remained for a few seconds before slowly rising back to normal. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I don't know what these things want from us. I don't know why they're here or if they're ever going to leave. All I know is that I've got another shift starting in 6 hours, and I'll be back in that haunted firehouse again, trying to do my job while sharing space with whatever entities have decided to make it their home too. Story 16. I've never really talked about this before, not even to my therapists. It's something that happened when I was 6, but I can remember it like it was yesterday. You know how childhood memories get fuzzy around the edges, like looking through an old scratched camera lens? Not this one. This one's crystal clear, and I wish to God it wasn't. I grew up in this old 2-story house in Michigan. It wasn't anything special. Just your average family home built in the 70s, with ugly brown carpet and wood paneling everywhere. My room was upstairs at the end of the hallway, right next to my little brother Jake's room. I've always been sensitive to things most people can't see. Even as a kid, I just knew stuff. I'd feel presences, sometimes see shadows moving where they shouldn't be, hear whispers when the house was empty. My mom called me different, and my dad just pretended it wasn't happening. But Jake understood. He had it too, just not as strong as me. That night, I remember it was early spring, still cold enough that Mom had the heat on. I woke up around 3 in the morning. Not the kind of waking up where you're groggy and confused. I was instantly alert, like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. The house was completely silent, except for the occasional creak of the heating system. My nightlight was casting this soft yellow glow across my bedroom. I had those glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to my ceiling and walls, little green dots that were always comforting, but that night they didn't feel comforting at all. I remember lying there, staring at my bedroom door, which was partially open. I always slept with it cracked because I was scared of the dark. Through that crack, I could see a sliver of the hallway, and then she was there. At first, I thought it was Mom checking on me, but within seconds, I knew it wasn't. This was someone else, something else. She pushed my door open slowly, and I remember the hinges making this tiny squeaking sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. And then she just stood there in my doorway, staring at me. It was a woman in a white nightgown or dress, something long and flowing. Her hair was dark and so long it reached past her waist, dripping wet like she'd just stepped out of a shower or been caught in the rain. Water was pooling at her bare feet on my carpet, but the worst part, the part that still makes my stomach drop 20 years later, was her face. It was my face, but older, like looking at myself as an adult, and she was smiling, not a warm, comforting smile. It was wrong, stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring directly into mine with this intensity that felt like it was boring into my soul. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just laid there, my little 6-year-old heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. The air felt thick, like trying to breathe underwater, and so cold I could see my breath. And she just stood there, staring and smiling that horrible smile for what felt like forever. Probably only 10 or 15 seconds in reality, but when you're a terrified kid, time works differently. The weird thing is, most spirits I'd encountered before, and since, have tried to communicate. They'd whisper things, try to get messages across, move objects, something, but she just stared, silent, smiling that fucking smile. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. Not like she walked away. She literally vanished. 1 second staring at me with that twisted grin, the next, nothing. just my empty doorway and the dark hallway beyond. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I pulled my blankets over my head and cried silently until morning came. When my mom came to wake me up for school, I looked like absolute hell. She thought I was coming down with something and let me stay home. I never told my parents. How could I? Hey Mom, I saw a grown-up version of myself last night standing in my doorway with wet hair and a creepy smile. They already thought I was weird enough with all the imaginary friends I had. The only person I ever told was Jake about a year later. We were building a fort in the backyard, and he suddenly got real quiet and asked if I'd ever seen the lady in the white dress in the house. My blood ran cold. I asked him what lady, and he described her, the long wet hair, the white dress, standing in doorways at night. But he'd never seen her face clearly, just that she was watching us. I told him then what I'd seen, and we made a pact to always leave our doors closed at night and to call out to each other if we ever saw her again. 3 years later, our parents got divorced, and we moved out of that house. I secretly hoped the lady in white would stay behind with whatever other spirits lingered there. For a while, I almost convinced myself it had been a particularly vivid nightmare. Almost, but deep down, I knew better. I've always known the difference between dreams and whatever this was. Life went on. I grew up, graduated high school, went to college. Jake and I stayed close, even though I moved to California for work, and he stayed in Michigan. He still lived with Mom, helping her out after her MS diagnosis. Then, 7 years ago, Jake was murdered. Home invasion gone wrong, they said. Some junkie broke in looking for cash, panicked when Jake confronted him and stabbed him 15 times. I flew back for the funeral feeling like half of me had been ripped away. The night after we buried him, sitting alone in my old bedroom at Mom's new house, Jake came to me. Not physically, but I felt him, saw a shadow of him sitting at the foot of my bed. We talked for hours, or rather, I felt what he was trying to tell me. Among the many things he shared before saying goodbye was a confirmation that chilled me to my core. The woman in white had been real. He'd seen her many times in our old house, always watching, never speaking. Since then, I've thought about her constantly. Who or what was she? If it was really my adult self, what was she trying to tell me? Why the silence? Why the smile? Was she warning me about something, trying to protect me? I'm 26 now, around the age she appeared to be when I saw her. Sometimes I catch myself staring in the mirror, terrified I'll see that smile creeping across my face. I've never worn my hair that long. I've never owned a white nightgown. It feels like avoiding these things might somehow keep her at bay, as irrational as that sounds. Last year I went to see that horror movie Smile with some friends. They had no idea why I had to leave the theater halfway through, shaking and nauseated. The same thing happened with Us, that movie about doppelgangers. It hit too close to home, dredged up that memory I've tried so hard to bury. I've researched everything I can about spirits, doppelgangers, time slips, demonic manifestations, anything that might explain what I saw. Some theories suggest demons can take forms familiar to us to gain our trust. Others say traumatic future events can sometimes ripple backward through time, creating echoes that appear as apparitions. There's even the multiverse theory, that it was me from another timeline trying to make contact. None of these explanations feel right. None of them explain that smile. I consider myself pretty spiritually tapped in these days. I've had countless other paranormal experiences, learned to shield myself, even developed abilities to communicate with those who've passed. But nothing has ever disturbed me like the woman in white. 20 years later, and I still sleep with my bedroom door firmly closed and locked. Sometimes I wonder if she's waiting for me, if there's some appointed time in my future when I'll become her. Will I find myself standing in a child's doorway someday, hair dripping, wearing white, unable to speak but compelled to smile that horrible smile? Is it a loop I'm destined to complete? The thought keeps me up at night. Last month, I was staying at a hotel for a work conference. Around 3 in the morning. Always 3. Have you noticed how often weird shit happens at 3? I woke up suddenly. That same alert feeling from when I was 6. The bathroom door was open just a crack, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw movement in the darkness beyond. I almost saw a white figure starting to emerge. I slammed my eyes shut, counted to 20, and when I looked again, the door was still cracked, but nothing was there, just shadows and my imagination running wild. But sometimes I think she's still out there watching and waiting. For what? I don't know, and that's what scares me most. Not knowing what she wants, what that smile means, or when she'll decide to show herself again. If any of you have experienced something similar or have insights about what this could be, I'd appreciate hearing them. 20 years is a long time to be haunted by a memory, especially one with a face that's almost your own, smiling at you like it knows exactly how your story ends. Story 17. I still can't explain what happened that night 3 months ago. I've been a railway ticket collector for almost 8 years now, and nothing like this has ever happened to me before or since. I'm not the type who believes in ghosts or supernatural stuff, but this experience shook me to my core. I was doing a late shift at this small junction station about 4 hours from Mumbai. It's not my usual posting. I was covering for a colleague who had a family emergency. The station isn't particularly busy except during specific train timings, and after my shift ended at 9:30 in the evening, I was supposed to stay overnight at the railway accommodation they provide for staff. The railway quarters were basic but clean, just a bed, small bathroom, and a desk. After my shift, I was feeling restless. I'd run out of cigarettes earlier that day and was really craving one. I'm a heavy smoker, 1 pack a day minimum, and going without was making me jumpy and irritable. I tried to ignore it for about an hour, but by 10:30 I couldn't take it anymore. I changed out of my uniform into jeans and a t-shirt and decided to find a shop in the town. The problem was, I didn't know this place at all. The station manager had already left for the night, and the only other staff member was asleep in another room. I didn't want to wake him up just to ask about cigarettes, so I figured I'd just walk around until I found something open. How hard could it be? I walked out of the station and into the town. It wasn't completely dead. There were still a few people around, but not many. The town was smaller than I expected, just a few streets branching off from the main road leading to the station. I walked for about 15 minutes before realizing I hadn't seen a single open shop. Strange, considering it wasn't even 11 yet. I approached a guy standing outside what looked like a closed restaurant and asked him if there was any place still open where I could buy cigarettes. He pointed vaguely down a street and said something about a shop that might still be open near the bus stand, so I headed in that direction. The bus stand was deserted when I got there, and the shop the guy mentioned was already closed. I was getting frustrated but decided to keep walking. The craving was bad, and I thought surely there must be at least one shop open somewhere. This went on for what felt like hours, walking from one area to another, occasionally asking the few people I encountered about open shops, only to find everything closed when I got there. I should have given up and gone back to the accommodation, but something kept pushing me forward. It was like I was being pulled along, almost compelled to keep searching. I wasn't even paying attention to the time until I happened to glance at my phone and saw it was already 2 in the morning. I'd been wandering around for over 3 hours. I was nowhere near the station anymore, and in a part of town I didn't recognize at all. That's when I saw them, an elderly couple with 2 sleepy children and several pieces of luggage, walking slowly along the road. I was so relieved to see other people that I immediately approached them. The old man looked about 70, wearing traditional clothes and thick glasses. His wife was wrapped in a colorful sari, looking tired but alert as she held the hand of a young girl who was practically sleepwalking. A boy about 10 or 11 years old was carrying a small bag and yawning continuously. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm a bit lost. Could you tell me how to get back to the railway station from here?" The old man smiled warmly. "We're heading there ourselves. You can walk with us if you like." I introduced myself, mentioning I was a ticket collector staying overnight at the station. They told me they were returning home after visiting the man's in-laws in a nearby village. They were catching the 3:45 train to Nagpur. "Let me help with those bags," I offered, taking 2 heavy suitcases from the old woman. The boy looked relieved when I took one of his bags too. As we walked, the old man asked me what I was doing wandering around so late. I explained about my cigarette craving and how I'd been unable to find an open shop. The old man nodded knowingly. "Sometimes things don't work out for a reason," he said. "My son used to smoke, 2 packs a day, died of lung cancer last year, only 42. I felt a chill go through me at his words, but I brushed it off. Just a coincidence, I told myself. The little girl, who had been quiet until then, suddenly looked up at me with serious eyes. "Smoking is very bad," she said in a voice that sounded oddly mature for her age. "It takes people away." The old woman shushed her gently. "Don't bother the nice man, Beta." We walked for what seemed like a long time. The streets were completely empty now, and our footsteps echoed in the silence. The old man pointed out landmarks as we went: a temple, a school, a small park. He spoke about them as if they held special memories, but something about the way he described them felt strange, almost like he was talking about places that no longer existed. I started to feel uneasy, but couldn't pinpoint why. The family seemed normal enough, just tired travelers trying to catch an early morning train. But there was something in the way they interacted with each other, something in their eyes when they looked at me that I couldn't quite place. When we finally reached the station, it was just after 3 in the morning. I was exhausted. The station was quiet, with only a few passengers sleeping on benches waiting for early trains. "Thank you for walking with us and helping with the luggage," the old man said. "You should get some rest now." I nodded, suddenly feeling incredibly tired. "Which platform is your train from?" I asked, thinking I should at least direct them to the right place. "Oh, we know the way," the old woman said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We've made this journey many times." I thanked them and headed back to my room. The moment I lay down on the bed, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I didn't even remember my cigarette craving anymore. I woke up around 5:30 in the morning, feeling groggy after only about 2 hours of sleep. My shift wouldn't start until 11, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The events of the previous night felt foggy and strange, almost like a dream. The craving for cigarettes hit me again, so I decided to go look for a shop. To my surprise, when I walked out of the station, I saw several shops already open. There was even a small tea stall with a few early morning customers sipping chai. I bought a pack of cigarettes and decided to have a cup of tea as well. "Been open long?" I asked the tea seller casually. "Since 4:30, he replied. "Same as every day." I nodded, then asked, "What time do shops usually close around here?" The man looked at me strangely. "Most shops near the station stay open until 2 in the morning at least. This is a junction station. Trains come and go all night, so business is good." I nearly spilled my tea. 2 in the morning, are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure," he said, looking annoyed. "Been running this stall for 15 years. The shops on Station Road never close before 2, sometimes later on weekends." This didn't make any sense. I had walked those exact streets last night, and everything had been closed well before 11. I mentioned this to him, but he just shook his head. "You must have been in the wrong area," he said dismissively. "The market area closes early, around 9 or 10, but the shops near the station always open late." I finished my tea in confused silence and walked back toward my room. On the way, I passed the station master's office and saw him already at his desk. I decided to ask him about the 3:45 train to Nagpur that the family had mentioned. 3:45 to Nagpur, he repeated, checking his schedule. "We don't have any train to Nagpur at that time. The first train to Nagpur is at 6:20. My heart started racing. "What about yesterday? Was there a special train or something?" He shook his head. "No, same schedule all week. No 3:45 train to Nagpur." I was about to ask him more questions when my phone rang. It was my father calling, which was unusual this early in the morning. I excused myself and answered. My father's voice was heavy with grief. Vikram, I have bad news. Arun passed away last night. Arun, my childhood best friend. We had grown up together, gone to school together. We had drifted apart over the years, but still kept in touch. He lived in Delhi now, running an NGO. What happened? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Heart attack. Very sudden. They found him in his apartment this morning, but the doctors say he died sometime around 2 or 3 a.m. 2 or 3 a.m. Exactly when I was walking with that strange family. I'll come home right away, I told my father, my mind reeling. After hanging up, I sat down on a bench, trying to process everything. Aaron and I had fought the last time we met, about 6 months ago. He had been campaigning against tobacco through his NGO and had been trying to get me to quit smoking for years. I had laughed it off, told him to mind his own business. We parted on bad terms, and I hadn't called to make things right. Then something else hit me, something the little girl had said. Smoking is very bad. It takes people away. And the old man talking about his son who died of lung cancer. Was it possible? Had Aaron somehow kept me wandering around all night, away from cigarettes during his final hours? Had he reached out one last time to try to save me from myself? I know how this sounds. It's crazy, impossible. But I've gone back to that town twice since then, and I've walked every street. The layout doesn't match what I experienced that night. Some of the landmarks the old man pointed out don't even exist, and I've never been able to find that family or anyone who remembers seeing them. I haven't touched a cigarette since that night. I can't explain what happened, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. All I know is that somewhere between 10:30 p.m. and 3 a.m., I experienced something I can't rationalize, and somehow I know it was Aaron's final gift to me. Story 18. I still can't explain what I saw that Halloween night in Millbrook 10 years ago. I was just 10 years old, staying at my cousin Jake's house for trick-or-treating because their neighborhood was way better than mine. More houses closer together, better candy and all that. Most kids had gone home by 11, but I was sleeping over, so I was still up around midnight while the adults were hanging out on the front porch. My Aunt Karen was being particularly annoying that night. She kept pinching my cheeks and asking if I'd had a spooktacular time, using that same stupid joke over and over. She'd had a few glasses of wine by then and was getting louder with each one. I just needed to get away for a few minutes, you know? Jake had already crashed from his sugar high, but his bike was right there in the garage. I figured I'd just ride around the block to clear my head. The streets were completely empty, all the trick-or-treaters long gone, just orange and purple string lights still glowing on some of the houses. The neighborhood was dead quiet except for the faint sound of the adults laughing on the porch behind me. I remember it was chilly, not freezing, but cold enough that I could see my breath. I was wearing this dumb pirate costume my mom had made, and the fabric was kind of thin, so I was getting goosebumps. I ditched the eye patch hours ago because it was annoying, but I still had the bandana on my head, so I'm riding Jake's bike down the middle of the street, which felt rebellious and cool because you can't normally do that, and I was maybe 15 yards from the house. The adults couldn't really see me because of this big oak tree blocking their view, but I could still hear them talking. I wasn't planning to go far, just far enough to escape Aunt Karen for a few minutes. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, this bright light just appeared. Like 1 second normal dark street, the next second I'm practically blinded. My first thought was that it was a car with high beams. You know, I started to move toward the sidewalk, but something felt off. There was no engine sound, no tires on pavement. The light faded after a few seconds, and I expected to see a car or maybe some teenagers with flashlights messing around. Instead, I saw, God, even now it's hard to describe. There was this figure standing in the middle of the road, maybe 20 yards ahead of me. At first, my brain couldn't even process what I was seeing because the proportions were so wrong. This thing was tall. I mean, not like tall like a basketball player or something. I mean tall like it was nearly as high as the power poles along the street, taller than the smaller trees in people's yards. I froze, my hands gripping the handlebars so tight my knuckles went white. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The weird part is, I wasn't exactly scared at first. I was just confused, like my brain was trying to make sense of what my eyes were seeing, but it couldn't. You know when you see something so unexpected that your mind just buffers like a slow internet connection? That's what it felt like. This thing was humanoid, but all wrong. It had these impossibly long, skinny limbs. Its arms hung down past where knees would be on a normal person. Its body was weirdly narrow, like someone had stretched a normal person vertically. And its skin, I remember this so clearly, its skin was this pale, almost grayish-white color, and it seemed slightly transparent. Not like you could see right through it, but like it wasn't fully solid. Kind of like when you put a flashlight under your hand and your skin glows red, except this was all over its body. It didn't have clothes on, at least not that I could tell, but it didn't have any details either. It was smooth, like a mannequin or something. Its face was the worst part. It had these dark hollows where eyes should be, and I couldn't tell if it was looking at me or not, but I felt like it was. The head was small compared to the body, almost like a pinhead on this massive frame. We just stood there. Me on the bike, frozen in place, and this giant thing in the middle of the road. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It might have been 10 seconds or 2 minutes. Time felt weird. Then it moved. God, the way it moved was all wrong. Its joints bent at strange angles, like they weren't hinged the same way ours are. Each step was stiff and deliberate, like it was having to think about how to walk. It took 3 steps toward me, and each footfall was completely silent. That's when the fear finally hit me. This massive thing moving toward me without making a sound. I wanted to turn the bike around and pedal like hell back to the house, but I was paralyzed. I literally couldn't move. It wasn't like in movies where the person is too scared to run. It was like my body physically wouldn't respond to my brain's commands. After those 3 steps, the giant suddenly stopped. Its head tilted slightly, like it was considering something. Then, in one fluid motion that didn't match its previous stiff movements at all, it turned toward the right and stepped onto the sidewalk. It moved away from me, heading down this narrow path that leads to the creek that cuts through the neighborhood. That path was poorly lit, just a dirt trail really, with trees on both sides. The giant had to duck under the branches, but even hunched over it was taller than the surrounding bushes. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the darkness of the path. The moment it was gone, whatever had been holding me in place released, and I nearly fell off the bike. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely pedal, but I rode back to my aunt's house as fast as I could. I dropped the bike on the lawn and ran up to the porch where the adults were still chatting. My Uncle Tom must have seen something in my face because he immediately asked, "You okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost?" The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me, even then. I opened my mouth to tell them about the giant, but suddenly I felt this overwhelming sense that they wouldn't believe me, or worse, they'd laugh it off. Adults always did that with the weird stuff kids saw, so instead I just said, "I saw a raccoon in the middle of the street. It startled me." My Aunt Karen laughed and said something about Halloween critters being extra spooky, and that was it. The conversation moved on, and I sat there in silent shock, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept looking out the window of Jake's room, expecting to see that pale giant looking in. Nothing happened for the rest of the night, though. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a Halloween decoration or some elaborate prank, maybe some teenagers on stilts with a costume. That explanation didn't really make sense with what I'd seen, but it was easier to accept than the alternative. When morning came, I walked down to where I'd seen it, half expecting to find evidence. Footprints, broken branches, something. There was nothing. The path to the creek looked normal, no sign that anything unusual had passed through. I never told anyone the full story until now. Not my parents, not Jake, not even my best friends as I got older. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was a weird shadow effect from the Halloween lights. Maybe it was my imagination overreacting to something mundane. Maybe I briefly fell asleep on the bike and dreamed it. But none of those explanations feel right. What I saw that night was real. It was there, In the middle of that suburban street, this impossibly tall, pale figure that defied explanation. And the weirdest part is that I never felt like it wanted to hurt me. It acknowledged me, considered me even, but then just moved on. I'm 20 now, in college, and I've never seen anything like it again. I've never had any other paranormal experiences. I'm not the type of person who believes in ghosts or monsters. I'm studying engineering, for crying out loud. I like things that can be explained, measured, calculated. But this one experience, this one night, I just can't file away neatly. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else in Millbrook saw it that Halloween night, or if anyone has seen it since. I wonder if it's still out there, walking those quiet suburban streets when everyone is asleep, its head nearly reaching the power lines. I don't go back to Millbrook for Halloween anymore. My aunt and uncle still live there, and I visit sometimes for Christmas or summer cookouts, but never Halloween. I tell my family I'm too busy with school, but the truth is, I'm afraid. Not that I'll see the giant again, though that thought does terrify me, but that I won't, that I'll stand in that same spot where I saw it 10 years ago, and there will be nothing but empty street and shadows, and I'll have to face the possibility that my one unexplainable experience was just a child's overactive imagination after all. But deep down, I know what I saw. That Halloween giant was real. And I still have no idea what it was or why it was there. That's what scares me the most, not knowing. Because if something like that can exist in our world without explanation, what else might be out there, just beyond the reach of our understanding? Story 19. I've lived in this neighborhood for about 7 months now. When I first moved in, I was so excited about my little house on Maple Street. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest 3-bedroom with a small yard. But it was mine. First house I ever owned. I remember driving down the street that first day, looking at all the neat lawns and thinking how perfect it all seemed. The neighbors all came by to introduce themselves that first week, all except the McPhersons next door. I caught glimpses of them occasionally. A middle-aged couple, probably in their 50s. Mr. McPherson was tall and thin with graying hair that always looked like it needed a trim. Mrs. McPherson was short with this permanently pinched expression, like she was always smelling something unpleasant. They never waved back when I waved at them. I figured they were just private people and didn't think much of it. About a month after moving in, I noticed something weird. It was around 11 at night, and I was taking out my trash before bed. The McPhersons were standing in their backyard, just standing there. They weren't talking or doing anything. They were just facing their house, completely still, like statues. I watched them for maybe 5 minutes, and they didn't move at all. It was freezing outside too. Late November in Michigan isn't exactly warm, but they just stood there in light jackets, not even shivering. Eventually, I got creeped out and went back inside. After that night, I started paying more attention to them. The blinds in their house were always drawn tight, regardless of the time of day. I never saw them open a window, even during those few nice days we had in early spring. Their porch light was never on, not even at night. The weirdest thing was their trash. Every Monday morning, their bins would be at the curb, completely full, but I never once saw either of them take them out. I'm an early riser too, usually up by 5:30. It was like they were sneaking out at 3 in the morning or something. About 3 months after I moved in, I started noticing Mr. McPherson standing at the end of his driveway sometimes, just standing there, looking down the street with this blank expression. Not checking mail, not waiting for someone, just staring. Once I drove past him coming home from work, and he didn't even blink as my car went by. His eyes were open, but it was like nobody was home. I tried asking other neighbors about them. "Oh, the McPhersons keep to themselves," was all anyone would say. Nobody seemed to know what Mr. McPherson did for work, or if Mrs. McPherson had a job. Nobody had ever been inside their house. They'd lived there for over 15 years, but somehow nobody knew anything concrete about them. Then came the night that really freaked me out. It was about 3 in the morning when I woke up to loud banging from next door. My bedroom shares a wall with their house, and it sounded like someone was slamming something heavy against the floor repeatedly. Then I heard voices, urgent, frantic, but muffled. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they sounded angry or scared or both. I got up and peeked through my blinds. The motion sensor light in my side yard had clicked on, illuminating part of their backyard. I saw Mr. McPherson dragging something across the grass toward their shed. It was a large black plastic bag, the heavy-duty kind, and it was bulging and obviously heavy. He was struggling with it. The bag caught on something, and for a second I thought I saw it move, but that couldn't be right. I blinked and he was dragging it into the shed. The next morning, I looked out my kitchen window while making coffee. There was a patch of freshly dug dirt near their shed. It wasn't big, maybe 3 feet by 2 feet. My stomach dropped. I tried to convince myself it was just a garden, but it was the wrong time of year for planting, and the McPhersons had never shown any interest in gardening before. Their yard was always just mowed, nothing else. I debated what to do for days. Finally, I called the non-emergency police line and told them what I'd seen. I felt stupid doing it. What could I even say? My neighbors are weird, and I saw them digging in their yard, but the banging and that heavy bag kept playing in my mind. 2 officers came by that afternoon. They took my statement, then went next door. I watched from my window as they spoke briefly with Mrs. McPherson on the porch. They never went inside. The whole interaction lasted maybe 10 minutes. Later, one of the officers stopped by to tell me they didn't see anything suspicious, and Mrs. McPherson said her husband had been disposing of an old carpet that had gotten water damage. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard scratching sounds coming through the wall. Not like an animal, more like something being dragged across a floor, then thumping, then silence. The weird behaviors continued. The patch of dirt by the shed seemed to grow larger over the next couple of weeks. Sometimes at night, I'd hear muffled voices from their backyard. Once, I swear, I heard crying, but it was so faint I couldn't be sure. I started keeping a journal of everything I noticed, writing down dates and times. Looking back at it now, I can see how the pattern was escalating, but at the time, I kept second-guessing myself. Then came the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday in May, around 4 in the morning. I was jolted awake by the sound of glass shattering next door, followed by what I can only describe as a scream cut short. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. The motion light in my side yard was on again, and through the gap in the fence, I could see Mr. McPherson in his backyard. He was dragging another black bag, bigger than the last one. This time I was sure I saw the bag move. There was no mistaking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. I told the dispatcher everything, the bags, the digging, the sounds, all of it. They told me to stay inside and lock my doors. I sat by my window watching the McPhersons' yard. The light had gone off, but I could still make out Mr. McPherson digging in darkness. Mrs. McPherson was standing nearby, just watching him. The police arrived within minutes, silent, with no sirens. 3 cruisers pulled up, and officers approached from both the front and back of the house. I heard shouting, then saw flashlights moving around the yard. An officer came to my door and asked me to stay inside. I stood at my living room window, watching as more police cars arrived, then an ambulance. Around 6 in the morning, when the sun was starting to come up, I saw them. The paramedics were bringing someone out on a stretcher, a person wrapped in blankets, alive, then another stretcher, another person. I couldn't see clearly, but they looked emaciated, with long matted hair. I felt sick. Later that day, a detective came to interview me. That's when I learned the truth. The McPhersons had been keeping people captive in their basement. 2 women who had been reported missing from neighboring counties. One 3 years ago, another just 8 months back. They'd found a hidden room behind a false wall in the basement, soundproofed with thick padding. The digging in the yard, that's where they'd buried a 3rd victim who hadn't survived. The detective told me that my call had likely saved those women's lives. The night I called, Mr. McPherson had been planning to kill one of them, who had managed to break a window in her desperate attempt to escape. The black bags I'd seen were used to move the women when the McPhersons needed to discipline them in the shed. The McPhersons were arrested. Their house was boarded up with police tape around it for months before it was eventually sold. The new owners completely renovated it, tearing out the basement and filling it with concrete. I still live in my house on Maple Street. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear banging or scratching from next door, but it's just my imagination playing tricks on me. The new neighbors are a young couple with a baby, normal, friendly people who wave and bring in their trash cans during daylight hours. But I'll never forget those black bags being dragged across the yard in the middle of the night. I'll never forget the patch of freshly dug earth that grew larger week by week. And I'll never forget the vacant stare in Mr. McPherson's eyes as he stood at the end of his driveway, looking at nothing. The worst part, all those neighbors who'd lived here for years, who'd just shrugged and said, "The McPhersons keep to themselves." They admitted later they'd all had suspicions. They'd all noticed things, but nobody wanted to get involved. Nobody wanted to seem nosy or paranoid, so they looked the other way while people suffered right under their noses. I don't look the other way anymore, and I never will again. Story 20. I still don't know how to explain what's been happening in our house. I've told a few close friends, but most people would probably think I'm making it up or that I'm going crazy. I'm not. I know what I felt, and now my family has felt it too. It started about a year ago. I was lying in bed one night, scrolling through my phone before going to sleep. Daniel, my husband, was downstairs watching some sports game. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of the TV. I was just about to put my phone down when I felt it. Several distinct droplets of water hitting my back. I jumped up immediately, thinking the ceiling must be leaking or something. I checked the ceiling. Bone dry. I felt my nightshirt, completely dry. I even ran my hand across the bedspread where I had been lying. Nothing. Not a trace of moisture anywhere. I convinced myself I must have imagined it, though it felt so real. The sensation was unmistakable, like when you're standing near someone shaking out a wet umbrella and those tiny droplets hit your skin. That specific feeling. I didn't mention it to anyone at first. What was I supposed to say? Hey, invisible water is dripping on me. But then it happened again about 2 weeks later. I was sitting at the kitchen table paying bills when I felt 3 or 4 drops hit my forearm. Again, nothing visible, nothing wet, just the sensation. After the third time, I finally mentioned it to my daughter Jessica. She's 19 and still living at home while attending community college. She looked at me like I was losing my mind. "Mom, you're probably just feeling your nerves firing randomly or something," she said with that know-it-all tone teenagers perfect. It's like when you think your phone is vibrating in your pocket, but it's not even there. Maybe she was right. I tried to brush it off, but the sensations kept happening. Sometimes weeks would pass without incident. Then I'd feel it again. Always the distinct sensation of water droplets, always with no visible source or actual wetness. I started to wonder if it might have something to do with Cassandra, my beautiful Cassie, my firstborn. We lost her 3 years ago in this house. She was only 21. Cassie had always loved water. As a little girl, she could stay in the bath until her fingers pruned beyond recognition. As a teenager, she was on the swim team. In college, she majored in marine biology. Water was her element. When we lost her to the aneurysm, it was so sudden. 1 minute she was laughing in the kitchen, the next she collapsed. Gone before the ambulance even arrived. The invisible water droplets made me think of her, but I kept that thought to myself. It seemed too much like wishful thinking, like I was trying to find meaning where there wasn't any. Then about 4 months ago, Daniel experienced it too. We were sitting on our bed watching a movie. Suddenly he jerked his arm up and rubbed it. "What the hell?" he muttered, looking at his arm. "What is it?" I asked, pausing the movie. Something wet just hit my arm. He was examining his skin, rubbing it with his other hand. It felt like water drops, but there's nothing here. My heart started racing. "You felt water drops, but there's nothing there?" He looked at me strangely. Yeah, exactly. Like 3 or 4 drops just landed on me. Why are you looking at me like that? I told him then, about all the times I'd felt the same thing over the past 8 months. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something else. Not exactly fear, but a kind of uneasy wonder. You think it's related to... He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew he was thinking about Cassie. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe it's just some weird house thing. Old pipes making the walls contract in a way that makes our nerves fire wrong or something. Daniel is practical. He's an accountant, deals in concrete numbers and verifiable facts. But he's also the man who held me for hours after we lost Cassie, who whispered through his own tears that she would always be with us somehow. Have you felt it anywhere else, outside the house? He asked. I hadn't. It only happened at home. Always indistinct. Always just the sensation. A few days after Daniel's experience, Jessica came into the kitchen while I was making dinner. She had her friend Jade with her. They'd been studying upstairs. Mom, Jessica said in a voice that made me turn around immediately. Remember that thing you told me about, with the water drops? I nodded, noticing how pale she looked. We both just felt it, Jade said. We were sitting on Jess's bed going over our notes, and we both felt water sprinkle on our legs at the same time. But there's nothing there. Jessica looked shaken. I thought you were imagining things, but it's real. We both felt it. That night, we had a family meeting, Daniel, Jessica, and me sitting around the kitchen table where Cassie used to do her homework. We talked about the experiences we'd had. Jessica had actually felt it twice before, but hadn't said anything because she thought it was just her imagination. What if it's Cassie? Jessica said finally, voicing what I'd been thinking for months. What if she's trying to, I don't know, let us know she's here? Daniel didn't dismiss it outright, which surprised me. If it is, he said carefully, then it's not something to be afraid of. And he was right. As strange as the experiences were, they never felt threatening. Startling, yes. Feeling water drops when there are none is disconcerting, but never scary in the way you'd expect a ghost to be. We started keeping track of when it happened. No clear pattern emerged. Sometimes it would happen when one of us was alone, sometimes when we were together. It never happened to guests except for Jade that one time. Never at night while we were sleeping, always when we were awake and alert. The most intense incident happened about 2 months ago. I was in Cassie's old room. We've kept it mostly the same, though Jessica has gradually claimed some of the space for storage. I was looking through one of Cassie's old journals, something I do sometimes when I miss her voice. Suddenly, I felt the water. Not just a few drops this time, but like someone had flicked a handful of water at my face and chest. I gasped and stood up, the journal falling to the floor. The sensation was so strong, so unmistakable, that I actually patted my face and shirt, expecting to find them wet. But of course there was nothing. "Cassie?" I said aloud, feeling both foolish and hopeful. "Honey, is that you?" Nothing happened. No response, no more water sensations, just me standing in my dead daughter's room, talking to the air. I picked up the journal. It had fallen open to a page where Cassie had written about a trip to the beach with her friends. There was a photo tucked into the page, Cassie laughing as a wave crashed over her legs, her hair wet and shining in the sun. Water. Always water. Last week, we were sitting in the living room as a family. Jessica was showing us something on her phone, photos from a campus event. I felt the familiar sensation on my arm and noticed Daniel rubbing the back of his neck at the same time. "You feel it too?" I asked. He nodded. "Back of my neck, like someone just sprinkled me." Jessica looked up from her phone. "I just felt it on my hand." We all fell silent, looking around the room as if we might see something, someone. The moment felt charged, significant. "Hi, Cassie," Jessica said softly. "We miss you." Daniel reached over and took my hand. I could see the tears in his eyes that he was trying to hold back. I don't know if the water sensations are really Cassie. Maybe there's some perfectly logical explanation, something about the humidity in our house, or some kind of shared delusion brought on by grief. Maybe we're all just so desperate to feel connected to her that we've manifested this strange phenomenon. But I also know what I've felt, what we've all felt, and the fact that it started happening about a year after we lost her, and that water was so special to her. It feels meaningful. It feels like her. The water spirit, as we've started calling it, continues to visit us. Not every day, not even every week, but regularly enough that it's become a part of our lives. A strange comfort in our grief. Today, it happened again. I was folding laundry, Cassie's old swim team towel that I still can't bear to get rid of. As I ran my hand over the faded team logo, I felt the droplets across the back of my hand. Clear as day, impossible to mistake. "I love you too, honey," I whispered. The scientists and skeptics would have their explanations. The religious might have theirs. All I know is that in our house, sometimes the air itself seems to remember the girl who loved water, who left us too soon. And in those moments, the veil between us feels as thin as a drop of water, invisible but unmistakably present. Story 21. I've never told this story to anyone except my therapist, who thinks I just had an overactive imagination as a kid. But I know what I saw, and it wasn't just my imagination. It's been almost 20 years and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was 8 years old when it happened. We lived in this typical suburban neighborhood called Willowdale. You know, the kind with matching mailboxes and everyone's lawn cut to the exact same height. Our house was nothing special, a 2-story with 4 bedrooms. My room was at the end of the upstairs hallway, across from my parents' room. That night started like any other. I went to bed around 8:30 after Mom tucked me in and read me a story. I fell asleep pretty quickly. I was one of those kids who could sleep through anything, but something woke me up in the middle of the night. I'm not sure if it was a noise or just that feeling you get when someone's watching you. When I opened my eyes, I immediately saw a figure standing by my wardrobe. It was my mom, at least it looked exactly like my mom. She was wearing her normal day clothes, this blue button-up shirt and khaki pants she wore all the time. She was holding a laundry basket against her hip, just staring at me. The moonlight from my window was hitting her face in this weird way that made her look off. At first, I thought she was just checking on me or maybe putting away some of my clothes, even though it was the middle of the night, which was weird. So I said, "Mom?" My voice came out all squeaky and small. Nothing. She didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring at me with this blank expression. Her chest was moving up and down really slowly, like each breath took forever. I called out again, a bit louder this time. "Mom, are you okay?" Still nothing, not even a twitch, just those slow, deliberate breaths, in, out, in, out. That's when I knew something was really wrong. My mom always answered me, even if she was mad or tired. She never just stood there. The longer I looked at her, the more wrong she seemed. Her eyes were empty, like someone had scooped out my real mom and left her shell standing there, and her skin looked waxy, almost like a mannequin. I pulled my blanket up to my chin, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, in my fingertips, everywhere. I was terrified this thing would hear it. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen under my covers. But eventually I squeezed my eyes shut and started repeating to myself, "Fall asleep, fall asleep, fall asleep." Over and over like a prayer or something. I was convinced that if I could just fall asleep, everything would be normal in the morning. When I finally opened my eyes again, sunlight was streaming through my window. The figure was gone. No laundry basket, no mom thing standing by my wardrobe. At breakfast, I asked my mom if she'd come into my room during the night. She looked confused and said no, she'd slept through the night. My dad backed her up. Said mom had been snoring next to him all night, and my mom has never sleepwalked, not once in her life. She's a super light sleeper who wakes up if someone flushes a toilet 2 houses away. I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream, but it felt too real. The moonlight on her face, the way her chest moved with those slow breaths, the empty look in her eyes. Dreams fade, but this memory has stayed crystal clear. That was just the beginning, though. Weird things kept happening throughout my childhood. Our dog would sometimes bark at empty corners of my room. My toys would move around when no one was home. I'd wake up with scratches on my arms that I couldn't explain. But the scariest thing happened when I was 15. This is the part that still makes me feel sick when I think about it. I'd gone to bed around 10:30 on a school night. Nothing unusual about the evening. Homework, dinner, TV, bed. But sometime in the middle of the night, I don't know how to describe it except to say I wasn't alone in my body anymore. I felt myself sit up in bed. But I wasn't the one doing it. It was like I was a passenger in my own body, watching through my eyes but with zero control over what I was doing. My body swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. I wasn't sleepwalking. I was fully aware of everything, just unable to stop it. My body walked downstairs in the dark. I didn't stumble or hesitate. It was like whatever was controlling me could see perfectly. We went straight to the alarm panel by the front door. My parents had installed this complicated security system after a break-in down the street, and they'd never even shown me how to use it. But my hands, not my hands, but the hands attached to my body, punched in the code without hesitation, 4 digits, then enter. The system beeped, and the little light turned from red to green. Then my body reached for the deadbolt on the front door, unlocked it, and opened the door. The cool night air hit my face. I was screaming inside my head, trying to regain control, but nothing happened. My body just kept moving forward. We stepped outside onto the porch. All the lights in the house were on now, which was weird because I hadn't turned them on. Or maybe I had. Everything was getting confusing. I don't remember what happened next. There's just this gap. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to my mom screaming. I was back in my bed, under the covers, but the front door was wide open and every single light in the house was on. The security system was disarmed. My mom was freaking out, thinking someone had broken in. They checked the house, checked me for signs of, I don't know, something bad. They called the police, but nothing was missing, and there was no evidence anyone had been in our house, just the open door and the lights. My parents thought maybe I'd sleepwalked, but I'd never done that before. And how would I have known the alarm code? When I tried to explain that something had taken control of me, they got really worried and took me to a doctor. The doctor said it was probably just stress or a weird sleep disorder, but I know what happened. Something was using my body, and I think it was connected to that thing that looked like my mom when I was 8. There were other strange things too. Starting around age 12, I began having these moments where I'd know things before they happened. Not big things like lottery numbers or anything, just small stuff. I'd know the phone was about to ring seconds before it did. I'd think of a song and then hear it on the radio immediately after. Once I had this overwhelming feeling that my best friend was in trouble, and 10 minutes later, her mom called to say she'd fallen off her bike and broken her arm. And then there's the spider thing. It sounds so stupid when I say it out loud, but spiders are weirdly attracted to me. They show up wherever I am, way more than is normal. In my bedroom, my locker at school, my first apartment in college. I'd find them in my shoes, my backpack, my hair. Other people noticed it too. My college roommate used to joke that I was secretly Spider-Woman. It wasn't funny to me. My therapist says all of this, the mom thing, the possession, the predictive moments, the spiders, is just my brain trying to make sense of normal childhood anxieties. She says kids often feel like they're not in control of their lives, so they create these narratives about external forces controlling them instead. Maybe she's right. But it doesn't explain how I knew that alarm code. It doesn't explain why that thing that looked like my mom felt so fundamentally wrong, like someone wearing my mom's skin as a costume. I'm 27 now, living in a different state, and I still sleep with a nightlight. I still wake up sometimes with that feeling of being watched. I still find spiders in the weirdest places, and sometimes, not often but sometimes, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a figure standing perfectly still, watching me with empty eyes. I don't know what attached itself to me all those years ago. I don't know what it wants or why it chose me. All I know is that it's been with me for most of my life, and I don't think it's ever going to leave. Last week I woke up in the middle of the night and found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror. I don't remember getting out of bed, but there I was, staring at my reflection. Only my reflection wasn't blinking when I blinked. It wasn't moving when I moved. For a split second before I ran back to my bedroom, I swear my reflection smiled at me, this horrible, empty smile that stretched too wide across my face. I'm scared of what's happening to me. I'm scared of what's coming next, but most of all, I'm scared that one day it'll be me standing motionless in someone else's bedroom in the middle of the night, wearing their loved one's face like a mask, breathing those slow, deliberate breaths while they cower under their covers, whispering to themselves, "Fall asleep, fall asleep, fall asleep." Story 22. I've never really talked about this outside my family, but it's been almost 15 years now, and I still get nightmares about it. I was in 4th grade when it happened. My parents had separated that year, and my dad thought it would be good for me to spend some time away from the city. So I transferred to this school in his province, in Negros Oriental. It was this old Catholic school that had both elementary and high school departments in one campus. The layout of the school is important to understand what happened. The elementary building was on one side, and across an open canteen area was the high school building. There was a small church near the main gate and a huge acacia tree right in the middle of the campus that everyone said was at least 100 years old. The tree always creeped me out. It was massive with these twisted branches that looked like arms reaching out. Everything seemed normal at first. I made some friends, though I still felt like an outsider since most kids there had known each other since kindergarten. My dad was really proud to have me in his hometown, and he'd drop me off every morning on his way to work. It happened on a Wednesday in August. I remember because we had just finished our morning prayers and flag ceremony. The sky was cloudy but not raining yet. Our teacher, Ms. Reyes, was in the middle of our English lesson when the door suddenly flew open. The school's guidance counselor was standing there, looking pale and shaking. She whispered something to Ms. Reyes, and I noticed how Ms. Reyes's face changed. Her eyes got wide and she covered her mouth. When the counselor left, Ms. Reyes turned to face us. Her hands were trembling as she tried to smile. "Children," she said, her voice unusually high, "I need you to pack your things very quietly. Very, very quietly. Don't make any noise, okay? When I tell you, we're going to form a line and hold hands. No one lets go. Understood?" We were confused, but did as told. Something in her voice made us all obey without question. I remember fumbling with my backpack, trying to stuff my books inside while keeping quiet. The silence in the room was heavy, not the normal kind when teachers ask for quiet, but a scary silence where you can hear your own heartbeat. "Remember," Ms. Reyes whispered as we lined up, "don't look at anyone outside. Just look down at your feet and keep walking. Hold hands tightly." That's when I started feeling real fear. Why couldn't we look? What was outside? We shuffled out of the classroom in our line. The hallway was empty and eerily silent. No sounds from other classrooms, no teachers talking, nothing, just the soft shuffling of our shoes against the cement floor. I was in the middle of the line, holding hands with my seatmate Jeffrey and a girl named Maria. When we reached the courtyard, I couldn't help myself. I looked up. The entire campus was in a state I can't fully explain. Teachers were running between buildings, some crying. Other classes were being led out like ours, teachers looking panicked. But what made my blood run cold was what I saw near the canteen area, at the boundary between elementary and high school sections. There were 12 to 15 high school students laid out on mats and towels on the ground. Some were unconscious. Others were thrashing around violently. I saw a girl, maybe 15 or 16, being held down by 3 male teachers as she screamed in a voice that didn't sound human at all. Another boy was trying to scratch his own face, drawing blood, while a teacher desperately tried to hold his hands. One girl's body was arched backward in a way that didn't seem physically possible, like her spine was going to snap. Her eyes were rolled back, showing only whites, and she was making these gurgling sounds. I'll never forget those sounds. Ms. Reyes noticed I was looking and yanked my arm hard. "Eyes down," she hissed, but I'd already seen too much. One of the students, a boy in a high school uniform, suddenly sat up and looked directly at me. His eyes were completely black, no whites at all. He pointed at me and smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. His mouth stretched too wide, showing all his teeth. Then he collapsed back down. I started crying silently. Maria was crying too. Jeffrey's hand was sweating in mine, squeezing so tight it hurt. As we approached the main gate, I saw the parish priest, Father Domingo, standing there with a bucket and what looked like a small broom. He was sprinkling holy water on each student as they passed, making the sign of the cross and muttering prayers. When it was my turn, he put his hand on my head and sprinkled water on me. The water was ice cold, and I remember how his hand was shaking. Outside the gate, parents were gathered, some crying, others looking angry and scared. My dad wasn't there yet. He didn't know what was happening. But my neighbor's mom took me to her house to wait for him. That night, I had terrible nightmares. I dreamed of that boy with the black eyes standing at the foot of my bed, still pointing at me with that horrible smile. I woke up screaming, and my dad came running in. I told him everything I'd seen, and for once, he didn't dismiss it or tell me it was just my imagination. He looked scared too. The next morning, my dad got a call saying school was suspended for the rest of the week, but he decided we should go there anyway. He wanted answers. I begged him not to make me go back, but he promised we wouldn't go inside, just talk to someone at the gate. When we arrived, the school looked deserted, except for a few teachers and what looked like church people going in and out. My dad spoke to the security guard who recognized him. Everyone knows everyone in small towns. The guard let us talk to the principal, Mrs. Cortez, who was sitting in her office looking like she hadn't slept. What she told us still makes my skin crawl. Apparently, the school had been expanding the high school building, and construction workers had been digging to lay the foundation when they found human bones. Lots of them. They hadn't reported it. They just moved the bones aside and continued working. Mrs. Cortez explained in a shaky voice that the school had been built on what was once a cemetery. Not a proper one with headstones and plots, but a mass grave from some epidemic that hit the province in the early 1900s. The land had been cheap when the school was built in the 1950s, and the original owners had supposedly reburied all remains, but clearly they hadn't. But the worst part was what happened to one particular high school student, a senior named Carlo. He had been the first to show symptoms during their history class. According to Mrs. Cortez, he suddenly stood up in the middle of the lesson, walked to the center of the classroom, and collapsed. When he regained consciousness, he wasn't himself anymore. He spoke in a language no one recognized, not Filipino, not English, not even the local dialect. His voice changed, becoming deeper, and he knew things he shouldn't have known, like personal secrets about his teachers and classmates. Then other students started collapsing too, one after another, as if whatever had taken over Carlo was spreading. The entity speaking through Carlo had demanded offerings. It wanted a native black chicken to be cooked and placed near the acacia tree. It wanted candles and prayers. It wanted respect for the disturbed graves. I remember Mrs. Cortez looking at my dad with tears in her eyes as she said, "We did it. We did everything it asked. The bishop performed an exorcism yesterday evening. The students are recovering now, but..." She didn't finish her sentence. My dad asked if the police had been called, if the Department of Education knew. She just shook her head and said some things were better handled by the church than the government. As we were leaving, I saw priests and some elderly men I didn't recognize placing something at the base of the acacia tree. There was smoke rising, incense maybe, and they were praying. The construction site had been abandoned, equipment still sitting there with yellow tape around the area. School resumed the following week, but it wasn't the same. The construction was permanently halted. The affected students returned to classes, but they were different, quieter, withdrawn. No one talked about what happened, at least not openly, but it was all anyone thought about. Parents pulled their kids out of school. Enrollment dropped by almost a third by the end of the month. I finished 4th grade there because my dad didn't want me to transfer mid-year, but I never went back after that. I convinced my mom to let me stay with her in Manila permanently. My dad understood. He never pushed me to return. I'm in college now studying psychology, partly because I'm still trying to make sense of what I saw that day. Was it mass hysteria, some kind of poisoning, or was it really something supernatural? All I know is that sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone is watching me. And in my dreams, I still see that boy with the black eyes pointing at me from across the canteen, his smile stretching impossibly wide as he mouths words I can never quite hear.